Welcome back to Potter Red, where the oldest magic keeps the deepest secrets. Today's adventure, Gringotts Cursebreakers found Harry was the guardian of a founder's relic at age 7. If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1, The 7-Year Reckoning. There is a place beneath London that the sun has never touched and the maps do not admit exists. It lies past the marble hall where tellers count the daylight coin, past the iron gates and the cart trails that scream down into the dark, past the vaults where old families keep their gold behind dragons that have forgotten the taste of open air. It lies below even those. The goblins call it the Old Deep, and they say it in the way that other people say the names of the dead, quietly and without hurry, because the Old Deep is older than hurry and will not be rushed by anyone's tongue. Down there the rock is not black, but a deep and lightless blue, cut 1,000 years ago by picks that have long since rusted to nothing. The vaults on that level are round, not square, and their doors are carved in the shape of the moon in its several phases, so that a goblin walking the passage with a lamp seems to pass a slow procession of moons waxing and waning against the stone. No cart runs to the Old Deep. It is reached on foot by those with the right to reach it, and the right is not written in any ledger a man could read. At the end of the deepest passage, where the blue rock closes in and the air goes still and cold and clean, there is a door. It is not large. A tall man would have to stoop to pass it, and no man ever has. It is a single slab of pale gray stone, seamless, set flush into the wall without hinge or handle or lock, and across its face runs a device cut so fine that the lamplight catches it only at certain angles, an open hand, palm upward, and above the hand a single star. The goblins have kept that door for 1,000 years. They have kept it without knowing what lies behind it, which is the hardest kind of keeping there is. They have set wards upon the passage and wards upon the wards, and every one of those wards bends, gently and without malice, around the door itself, because the door was there before Gringotts was, and the founding compact of the bank binds the goblin nation to guard it and forbids the goblin nation to open it. Cursebreakers have stood before it across 40 generations. They have laid their instruments against the pale stone and read nothing. They have pressed their long, clever fingers to the carved hand and felt only cold. The door does not resist them, which is worse than resistance. It simply declines to notice them at all, the way a mountain declines to notice the ant that climbs it. Once, 400 years ago, a cursebreaker named Karok grew tired of not being noticed. He was reckoned the finest of his generation, and he could not abide a lock that would not so much as insult him with a defense. He worked the door for 11 days. He brought against it every discipline the guild had gathered in 1,000 years of undoing what other beings had done, and on the 12th morning his apprentices found him sitting on the cold floor with his back to the wall opposite the pale stone, entirely unharmed, entirely sane, looking at the carved hand with the fixed patience of a creature that has finally understood the terms it is living under. He never touched the door again. He is quoted in the deep records that are not copied as having said only this: "It is not a lock. A lock is a question with a hidden answer, and I know every question. This is a promise, and a promise is not answered. It is kept or it is broken, and I am not the one it was made to." He guarded it for the rest of his life and taught his apprentices to guard it and told them nothing, because there was nothing to tell that the door had not already told him, that it was waiting and that the wait was not his. On the 9th night of a July that men above were calling ordinary, the door began very faintly to hum. No goblin heard it, because no goblin was near enough. But in the blue rock the hum ran outward in rings, the way a struck bell sends its note through the beam it hangs from, and a mile of stone above, in a warm dry room where the ledgers of the dead are kept, a seal that had slept for 300 years grew warm. Vornak had broken curses for 91 years, and in 91 years he had learned that the most dangerous thing in any vault is not the trap, it is the thing that is not supposed to be there. He said as much often to whichever apprentice the guild had most recently saddled him with. He said it now into the dust and the lamp smell of Vault 687, though the apprentice in question was crouched at the far wall with his nose almost against a stack of galleons and was not, Vornak judged, listening. "Rip not, counting," said Ripnot without turning. "You told me to count. I told you to count 3 hours ago. The count is a formality. The Potter Trust has not moved a nut since the estate was frozen, which we knew before we came down because we froze it." Vornak set his lamp on the reckoning stone in the center of the vault and unrolled the estate scroll across it, weighting the corners with 4 small lead moons. "The count tells us nothing. The reckoning tells us everything. Do you know the difference?" Ripnot sat back on his heels. He was young, as goblins reckon it, 60 and change, and he had the look of a curse-breaker who had spent more of his life among runes than among coin, which was the correct way for a curse-breaker to have spent it, though Vornak would not have told him so. "The count is what's here," Ripnot said. "The reckoning is what should be here and whether the two agree. And when they disagree, then someone has been in the vault or something has grown in it. Grown in it." Vornak allowed himself the flat line that served him for a smile. You have been reading the old case rolls. The Malkin bequest, the thing in the rosier vault that ate the appraiser's shadow. Yes, I read. Ripnot rose and came to the stone, brushing gold dust from his knees. So, the 7-year reckoning of the estate of one Harry James Potter, minor ward of the bank until majority. Trust vault, this one 687. Contents, gold, sufficient. A cabinet of family papers. A locked case of oddments the appraisers never fully catalogued because the family instructed them not to. He tapped the scroll. Routine, the dreary kind. Parents dead 6 years, boy raised by muggles, comes into it all at 17. We do 100 of these a year. We do, Vornak agreed. He set his thumb on the reckoning scroll and read down it in the old habit, aloud, because a reckoning read aloud catches errors that a reckoning read in silence lets pass. Clause 1. The trust vault holds no less than the sum entailed by the will of James Charles Potter, deposited 11 years ago untouched. It holds that sum. Clause 2. A stipend of the 4th grade releases to the guardian of record upon petition. No petition has been filed, interesting and telling and not our business. Clause 3. The family papers remain sealed to all but a Potter of the blood or the appointed executor. The seal is intact, you can see it on the cabinet, the wax lion unbroken. Clause 4, he paused. Clause 4 names a locked case of oddments, catalogued by the appraisers as items of sentiment, no market value, family instruction, do not open, do not value, do not remove. Signed in the appraiser's own hand 3 centuries ago with a note beneath it. He looked up. Do you know what the note says? Ripnot shook his head. It says, the instruction is older than the case. A 14th century appraiser found a case in this family's keeping and was told by the family not to open it, and when he asked why, the family could not tell him because the family did not know either. They only knew that they had always had it and that one did not open it, the way one does not put out a hearth fire that has burned since the house was built. The instruction is older than the case. And the case, Vornak finished, is on the inventory. It is a known thing, a documented mystery, tame with age. That is not what we are looking at. We're looking at the thing that is not on the inventory at all. We are. Vornak rolled the scroll a hand's width and pinned it. And what is not routine? Ripnot's eyes moved along the vault and stopped. He had good eyes. That was why the guild kept pairing him with Vornak, who had begun in his 10th decade to find that the far corners of vaults were softer than they used to be. Against the eastern wall, half behind the cabinet of papers, stood a casket. It was small, no longer than a goblin's forearm, and it was wrong in every particular that a trained eye could name. The Potter vault had been cut by its deposit glyph in the 14th century. The casket was older. Its wood was black bog oak banded in iron that had gone the deep, even brown of great age, and the iron had been worked, not cast, by a hand that predated the Gringotts foundries. There was no dust on it. Everything else in the vault wore 6 years of stillness like a gray coat, and the casket wore nothing at all, its black wood clean as the morning it was worked. On the lid, worked in the old brown iron, was an open hand, palm upward, and above the hand a single star. That, said Ripnot, is not on the inventory. No, the appraisers of the 14th century were thorough. The appraisers of every century since have been thorough. It is on no inventory of this vault, and it is older than this vault, and it has no dust on it. Ripnot had gone very still, in the way of a curse breaker who has stopped thinking about being clever and started thinking about staying alive. Master Vornak, that has been carried. Say the rest of it. A vault does not acquire objects older than itself by accident. Someone put it here. It is on no deposit record, which means it was never deposited. It was carried in from vault to vault down the generations, by hands that had the right to open every door it passed through and the sense to write it in no book. He looked up. It has been traveling inside this bank for 1,000 years, and it stopped here because this is where the Potter blood is. Vornak said nothing for a moment. When he spoke it was very quiet, and quiet from Vornak was a kind of alarm. Put your hand near it. Not on it, near. Ripnot extended one long finger to within an inch of the iron star. He held it there. Then he drew it back and looked at the pad of his finger and then at Vornak. It's warm, he said. Yes, nothing in this vault is warm. The stone is at the temperature of the deep always, forever, and everything in it is at the temperature of the stone. That is warm. That has been warm recently, and warmth is work, Vornak finished. Magic at labor gives off heat. Something in that box has begun within these last days to do work, after 1,000 years of doing nothing. He rolled the estate scroll shut with hands that were entirely steady, because he was 91 years old and had learned long ago that the hands are the last thing a curse breaker is permitted to lose. We are not opening it, we are not touching it. We are carrying it carefully by the ends, not the lid, up out of the deep, and we are taking it to Agner, and we are going to find out why a box marked with the sign on the warden's door has begun to breathe. Ripnot's head came up sharply. The sign on the, you have never been to the old deep. You are too young and too junior, and you should thank your ancestors for both. But I have stood before the door at the end of the deepest passage, the one no goblin has opened in 1,000 years, and I have looked at what is cut into its face. Vornak lifted the casket by its iron-banded ends, and it came up light, far too light, lighter than bog oak and iron had any right to be, as though most of what it weighed were kept somewhere other than here. An open hand and a star. They carried it up out of the deep on foot, because there is no cart to the level of the Potter vault that a cursebreaker will trust with a warm box, and Ripknot, who had never in his life been permitted to be quiet when a question was available to be asked, lasted 3 flights before he asked it. "What is a warden?" Vornak did not slow. He walked with the casket held out from his body in both hands level, the way one carries a full vessel that must not spill, and he answered in the clipped, exact way he taught, because teaching was the only thing that kept an apprentice's hands steady when the work turned strange. "There are 3 ways to hold a thing," he said. "You can own it, which means the law says it is yours and will help you keep it. You can possess it, which means you have your hands on it and the law is not consulted. You can guard it, which is the oldest and the strangest of the 3, because a guard holds a thing precisely by never taking it for his own. A warden is a guardian written into blood, not a servant. A servant is paid and can quit, not an owner can sell. A warden is bound to a charge the way the tide is bound to the moon, without wages, without release, and the binding passes down the blood whether the blood wants it or not." He turned onto the next stair. The founders did not make many. To be made a warden in the founding time, a family had to be trusted past the trusting of kings, because a warden cannot be bribed out of a duty he was born into and cannot be threatened out of it either, since the duty is older than any threat that could be raised against it and will outlive the one who raises it. And this warden is 7 years old and lives with muggles and doesn't know his own blood. "Yes, that seems," said Ripknot, choosing the word with care, "like a design flaw." "It is the opposite of a design flaw." Vornak came out onto the landing where the blue rock gave way to the gray of the middle vaults, and he stopped, and he looked at his apprentice with the flat patience he kept for the truly important things. "A grown warden, rich and armed and knowing, is a warden a clever enemy can find and buy and break. A child who does not know what he is, that is a lock with the key thrown into the sea. The founders were not fools. They keyed the guardianship to blood and hid the blood in the world and set the whole of it to wake only at 7 winters, in a child too young to be corrupted and too new to be suspected. It is the safest hiding place ever devised. It has kept the vigil for 1,000 years. He began to climb again. "It has one weakness, and only one, and we are about to become that weakness, because from the hour this bank tells the child what he is, he stops being a lock with no key. He becomes a key that walks and talks and can be followed home." His voice did not change, which was how Ripknot knew to take it seriously. "So we will be careful, we will be very, very careful." The keeper of seals worked in a room without windows, which was no hardship, since the keeper of seals had not seen a window or anything else in 60 years. Agner was old past the counting of it. His eyes had clouded to the blank white of river ice, and he had let them, because the seeing of the world with the eyes is a coarse and lazy way of seeing, and the seals do not give up their truth to the eye. They give it to the fingers, and to the older sense beneath the fingers that has no name in any human tongue, and only an approximate one in gobbledygook. That at a table worn smooth as glass by 3 centuries of caskets set upon it and lifted away, and when Vornak set the bog oak box before him, he did not reach for it at once. He turned his blind face toward it and was still, the way a man is still when he hears his own name spoken in another room. "Where did you find this?" he said. It was not a question. Agner had stopped asking questions before either of the cursebreakers was born. "Vault 687, said Vornak. "Behind the family papers. It is not on the inventory. It has no deposit record. It predates the vault by 4 centuries at least, and the seal is warm." "The seal is warm," Agner repeated, and something moved across the ruin of his face that in a younger goblin might have been called wonder, though Agner had outlived wonder too, or thought he had. "Yes, it would be. Give me the room, both of you. No, stay. Stay and watch and learn what you are looking at, because you will not look at it twice in your lives, and neither will your grandchildren." He laid his hands on the casket. His fingers were long and dry and spotted, and they moved across the iron-banded lid the way a man reads a face he has not touched in years, the brow first, then the cheek, then the mouth. When they found the worked hand and the star above it, they stopped. "Bog oak," Agner murmured. "Cut from a tree that fell into a fen before the Romans came, and lay in the black water 1,000 years, and was raised and worked by a smith who is dust. The iron is older than our foundries. This band here was beaten flat with a hammer, not drawn. You can feel the hammer's own signature in it, the little overlapping moons where the face struck. There were 3 smiths in the old north who worked iron so, and 2 of them never left a piece so fine. So, 1 smith. Could give you her name if the name would mean anything to you, which it would not." His fingers moved on, and the seal, the room had gone entirely silent. Ripknot realized he had stopped breathing and did not start again. "A blood seal," said Agner, "the oldest kind, not wax. Wax is a child's toy. Wax is for merchants and marriages. This is graven into the iron and then quickened with blood, 1 drop from the one whose seal it is, and the blood does not stay in the iron. It goes elsewhere. It goes into the seal's true keeping, which is not a place, and it waits there, and the seal sleeps, and it sleeps, and it sleeps, and it feels nothing and answers to nothing for years, for centuries, for as long as there is no living blood near it that matches the drop that was given." He lifted his face. "Until there is, and there is," said Vornak, "there is." Agner drew his hands back from the box and folded them, and for a moment he looked less like a keeper of the bank's oldest secrets and more like something carved on the door of a tomb. This is the charter of the vigil. I have never held it. No living goblin has held it. I know it as I know the name of the first director from the deep records, the ones we do not copy, the ones a keeper is given to hold in his head and take unspoken to the grave. It was made in the founding time when Gringotts was young and the four who built the school in the north came down into the dark to ask a thing of us. He turned his blind eyes on Ripknot unerringly, and the clouded whites might have been seeing after all. You want to open it. I can hear you wanting to. Do not. When you have carried a thing like this, you will understand that it opens itself in its own hour to the one hand it was made for, and every other hand that forces it only breaks it. Take it to the director. This is no longer a matter for curse breakers. This is a matter for the compact, and the compact is the director's to keep. The director of Gringotts was called Ragnarok, as 3 directors before him had been called Ragnarok, because the office wore the name the way a scabbard wears a sword, and the goblin inside it mattered less than the fact that the office was full. He received them in the high round chamber where the founding compact hangs on the wall in a case of goblin glass that no spell and no greed had ever cracked, and he listened to the whole of it without moving, and when Agner had finished, the director looked for a long moment at the bog-oak box on the table before him. A living warden, he said. The seal is warm, said Agner. The seal does not lie. It does not warm for a cousin or a claimant or a clever man with a drop of stolen blood in a vial. It warms for the blood, the true blood, the unbroken thread. There is a living warden of the vigil, and by the clause of 7 winters the seal has quickened because the warden's blood has come, or is coming, to 7 years upon the earth. That is the law of the thing. The founders wrote it so. The guardianship wakes in its keeper at 7 winters, when the child is old enough to hold a first understanding and young enough to be shaped by it. Ragnarok's fingers moved on the arm of his chair, a slow drumming, the only motion in him. For 900 years, he said, this bank has guarded a door it could not open on the word of a compact whose other party was thought to have died out of the world. The warden line failed, that is the record. It failed in the plague years or the goblin wars or one of the 100 quiet extinctions that swallow old families, and the door became a duty without a reason, a lock with no key living. We kept it because we keep our word. We did not keep it because we expected the key to walk back into the world. He stopped drumming. Whose blood? Vornak had been waiting for the question, and he had the answer ready because he had spent the 2 hours since Agner spoke doing the only thing a cursebreaker can do with a mystery, which is to run it to ground. The seal warmed in vault 687, he said. The Potter trust, so I went to the blood ledger. There was a stir in the room. The blood ledger is not a thing the bank speaks of lightly. It is the great genealogy the goblins keep of every family that has held gold with Gringotts, drawn not in ink, but in a red line that runs living down the vellum, forking and thinning and going out, generation by generation, a map of who descends from whom that no forgery has ever fooled and no wizard has ever been permitted to read. The Potter line, Vornak went on, runs back cleanly for 6 centuries. Then it runs into the Peverils, and the Peverils run back further, and the red thread thins, and I followed it thinning through names that have no descendants but this one, through the plague years, through the wars, all the way down to the founding time. He set a slip of vellum on the table before the director. On it a single red line ran unbroken from top to bottom, and at the bottom it ended in a name. It does not fail. The warden line did not die out. It went aground under another name, the way a river goes under a mountain and comes out changed on the other side, and no one thinks to call it the same river. It came out as the House of Potter, and the thread ends living and warm in a child. Ragnarok looked at the name. Harry James Potter, he read, age 6, 7 at the end of this month. 7 at the end of this month, Vornak agreed, which is why the seal is warm. The director sat back. When he spoke again, it was in the register the goblins keep for law, flat and formal and very old. Then we have a problem that is also a duty, and I dislike those most of all because you cannot put them down. He turned the vellum slip face down on the table, a small gesture, oddly gentle. There is a living warden of the vigil. He is 7 years old. He does not know it. And behind the old deep, behind a door this bank has guarded for 1,000 years without knowing why, there is a thing the founders thought worth binding a family and a nation to guard for 1,000 years. Gornuk, the law speaker who had been standing at the wall so quietly that the 2 curse breakers had half forgotten him, stepped forward. He was lean even for a goblin, and he had the courtroom habit of never saying a word more than the situation had paid for. Director. What does the compact require of us? 2 things, said Gornuk, that pull in opposite directions, which is the usual number. He came to the table and set one finger on the bog-oak box without quite touching the seal. First, the compact binds us to guard the vigil and its charter and to render both whole and unspoiled into the hand of the true warden when the true warden comes of understanding. The seal names 7 winters as the age of first understanding. The warden has come. Therefore we are bound now to bring the charter to him and read it in his hearing. That is not a courtesy. It is a debt of 1,000 years, and a goblin debt does not soften with age. And the second thing, The second thing is that the warden is a child under wizard law, and wizard law has put him in the keeping of muggles and set a watcher over him. Gornuk's mouth thinned. Albus Dumbledore. Chief Warlock, Supreme Mugwump, and the man who filed the guardianship papers that placed the last of the Potters with his mother's sister. If we send a writ to a Muggle house summoning a 7-year-old to Gringotts, that writ crosses Dumbledore's watch before the ink is dry, and Dumbledore will want to know why the goblins are so very interested in a child he has taken pains to keep unremarkable. He does not know about the vigil. No one living knew about the vigil until Vornak's apprentice put his finger near a warm box this morning, said Gornuk. And I would keep it that way as long as we can, because a founder's relic that answers to one small living hand is the kind of secret that grows wolves, collectors, the ministry which cannot bear for any old power to exist that it does not license and tax and store in a numbered box, and worse than either. He let that sit. The moment more than 3 people know a thing, it is no longer a secret, it is a countdown. Name the wolves, said Ragnarok. I would rather hear them counted than imagine them. Gornuk counted them on his long fingers without heat as he might read down a docket. 1. The private collectors, the antiquarians, the men with vaults deeper than their consciences who have spent their lives and fortunes hunting the relics of the founders and coming home with fakes and fragments. To such a man, a true and waking founder's relic is not a treasure. It is the meaning of his life, arrived at last, and he will do to a child whatever the getting of it requires and call it destiny while he does it. 2. The ministry which does not covet the way a man covets, but worse, it covets on principle. It cannot bear that any power should exist in Britain that it has not measured, licensed, and shut in a numbered room in the Department of Mysteries. It will come with parchment and committees and the language of the public good, and it will try to take the vigil into protective custody of the nation, and it will believe itself the hero of the taking. 3. He folded the last finger down. The ones who serve the first 2 and are worse than either because they have skill and no scruple. The struck-off curse-breakers, the hollow men, the ones the guild has cast out and who would love nothing more than to break, for gold, the one door they were never good enough to be trusted with. He let his hands fall. That is the field director, a child, a relic, and 3 kinds of hunger, and the only shelter the child has is that he does not yet know he is standing in the middle of it. Then let us not make him a target before we have made him a warden, said Ragnarok. Speed and silence, draw the reading. Ragnarok was silent for a while. The founding compact glowed faintly in its case on the wall, the goblin glass throwing back the lamplight in slow amber curves. We have an old right, the director said at last, older than Dumbledore, older than his ministry, older than the wizard law that thinks itself the eldest thing in Britain. When a bank holds the blood of an heir, the bank may read that blood and no wizard may forbid it. It is written into the founding treaty. They gave it to us in exchange for our silence about 100 things long ago, and they have regretted it in a small way ever since and never dared repeal it. He looked at Gornuk. Draw the writ, not a summons. A summons is a courtesy, and courtesies can be refused. Draw the reading. The bank exercises its right to read the blood of Harry James Potter, minor heir, in the matter of an ancestral instrument lately woken. Send it to the Muggle house. Send a goblin with it, not an owl, because an owl can be turned back at the door and a goblin cannot. And Dumbledore will hear of it within the day, and he will come, and he will be very kind and very curious and very frightening in the gentle way he has, and he will try to learn what we are about. Ragnarok rose, and the 2 curse-breakers and the law-speaker and the blind keeper rose with him. We will tell him nothing that the compact does not require us to tell him, which is nothing at all. The vigil is not his, it is not the ministry's, it is not the bank's. It belongs to a door in the dark and to the child whose blood woke it, and until that child stands in this room and hears his charter read, it belongs to no one else on the earth. He set his hand flat on the bog oak lid, over the iron hand and the iron star, and did not flinch from the warmth of it. Vornak, you found it. You will carry the reading to him yourself. Take your apprentice. Fright no one, and bring me back the truth of whether 1,000 years of guarding has come at the last to a boy raised in a cupboard by people who never told him his own name. Vornak inclined his head. How do you know he was raised in a cupboard? I don't, said Ragnarok. But I have read a great many estates of the dead, and I have learned how the world treats a child it has decided is no one. Go. Number 4 Privet Drive was a house that had been designed to have nothing worth noticing about it, and had succeeded so thoroughly that even the moon seemed to slide over its roof a little faster than it slid over the roofs to either side. In the cupboard under the stairs, Harry Potter lay awake and listened to the house breathe. He had a system for this. When the Dursleys were asleep, the house made a particular set of sounds, the tick of the boiler cooling, the settling of the stair treads above his head, the distant electrical hum of Vernon's alarm clock, and if all of those sounds were present and none of the others, then the night belonged to Harry and he could think. He did his best thinking at night. In the daytime there were too many rules to keep track of, too many ways to be wrong, too many chances for Aunt Petunia's eyes to fasten on him and find him doing something a normal boy would not do, like reading the backs of Dudley's cereal boxes for the ingredients he did not recognize, or working out in his head how long it would take the water in the kettle to boil if it started at the temperature of the tap. He was 7 years old at the end of the month, and he had learned very early that the safest thing to be in this house was unremarkable, and the second safest thing to be was invisible, and he was rather good at both, though he did not think of it as a skill. He thought of it as weather. It was simply how the days went. He had worked out a great many things about the Dursleys, the way other children work out the rules of a card game they have not been taught but must play anyway. He knew that Uncle Vernon's temper ran on a schedule, worst at breakfast when the post came and worst of all when the post brought bills, and that if Harry was in the garden by 7 he could miss the whole of it. He knew that Aunt Petunia watched him most closely when he was doing well at something, a spelling test, a drawing, and least closely when he had been made small, and so he had learned to be careful about doing well, and to hide the things he was good at the way another child might hide sweets. He knew that Dudley was not cruel by nature but by encouragement, which meant Dudley could be steered, if you were quiet about it and never let him see the steering. Harry had never told anyone any of this. There was no one to tell. He kept it all in his head, in the same orderly place where he kept the boiling times of kettles and the number of stairs to each landing, and the fact, noticed and never mentioned, that strange things happened around him when he was frightened, and only when he was frightened, and that this too was a rule, and that a rule could be studied. But at night the rules went to sleep with the Dursleys, and Harry could take out the things he had noticed during the day and turn them over. Tonight there was a new thing to turn over, and it was the strangest thing he had ever noticed, because he had noticed it inside himself. It had started 3 days ago as a warmth, not a fever. He knew fever. He had had one alone in the cupboard last winter and told no one and got better anyway, but a warmth with a shape, low down and to the left under the ribs, no bigger than a coin. It came and went. It was strongest at night. And with it came the dream, the same dream, 3 nights running, which never happened, because Harry's dreams were usually about school or about food, or once memorably about a flying motorcycle, and they never came back the same. In the dream he was walking down into the dark, not a frightening dark. A cool blue, clean dark, going down, and the walls were stone cut in the shape of moons, and at the bottom there was a door too small for a grown man, and on the door was a hand held open with a star above it, and the hand was, he had no other word for it, the hand was waiting for him. Waiting patiently. The way you wait for someone you are sure will come, even if they are late, even if they are years late, because you know the shape of them and you would know them anywhere. Harry lay in the dark of the cupboard and pressed his palm flat against the warm coin shape under his ribs and thought very clearly, as he thought about everything. That is not normal, and normal is safe, so I should be afraid of it. But he wasn't. That was the second strange thing, and he turned it over too. He wasn't afraid of the warmth or the dream or the waiting hand. He felt, in a way he could not have explained to anyone and would not have tried, that the warmth was on his side. That it had been looking for him. That somewhere at the bottom of a stair much longer than the one over his head, something had been waiting a very long time and had only just realized he existed and had turned at last toward him. He fell asleep with his hand over his ribs. He did not hear 4 streets away the soft displacement of air that is the sound of something arriving that ought not to be able to arrive. He did not hear the careful, deliberate footsteps come up the dark garden path, too short and too even for any grown man's stride. But something in him heard, because the warmth under his ribs pulsed once hard, like a heartbeat that was not his own, and in his sleep Harry Potter smiled and turned toward the cupboard door as though toward a knock he had been expecting all his life. On the front step, out of the reach of the moon, a goblin in a coat of oiled black leather set down a heavy envelope of gray vellum sealed with red wax, and looked up at the ordinary, ugly, unremarkable house, and said to no one, in the flat voice of a creature delivering a debt 1,000 years overdue, "Warden." Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. A summons in green ink. The envelope was on the doorstep when Petunia Dursley opened the front door at 6:30 to put out the milk bottles, and she knew what it was before she knew anything else about it, the way you know a wasp in a dark room by the sound alone. It was gray. Not the gray of cheap paper, but the gray of something that had been a living thing once, thick and slightly warm to the touch, with a weight to it that ordinary post did not have. It was addressed in green ink in a hand too even to be human, and it did not say Mr. Harry Potter, care of, and then the address, the way a letter from a school or a doctor would. It said, to the warden at the 4th house on Privet Drive, the small room beneath the stair. Petunia stood in her own doorway in her dressing gown with the milk bottles cold in her hand, and she read the small room beneath the stair 3 times, and then she looked over her shoulder into the hall, at the little door under the staircase with its cheap brass latch, and something went out of her face that had been holding it up for a long time. She had thought she had put it all away. She had married a man who believed in nothing he could not sell, insure, or drive, and she had built a life so ferociously ordinary that magic could find no crack to get a finger into. And she had taken in the child because there had been no one else, and because a part of her that she did not examine could not quite let her sister's boy go to strangers, and she had told herself every day for 6 years, that if she kept everything small enough and gray enough and quiet enough, then the other world. Lily's world, the world that had taken Lily and given her back in a box, would forget that this house existed. The envelope in green ink said that it had not forgotten. It had only been waiting for a date. She brought it inside. She did not open it because she was not a fool, and she had seen, long ago, what happened to people who opened wizarding letters that were not addressed to them. She set it on the kitchen table and she stood over it with her arms folded, and that was how Vernon found her when he came down for his breakfast, and that was how Harry found her, a moment later, coming up from the cupboard with his hair full of sleep and a smear of gray dust on his cheek from the underside of the stairs. He saw the envelope. He saw his aunt's face above it. He was 7 years old, and he had spent every one of those years learning to read the weather of this kitchen, and he read now with perfect accuracy that whatever the gray envelope was, it was about him, and it was large, and it had frightened the one adult in his life who was never frightened of anything except the neighbors. He did not say a word. He had learned that too. "What," said Vernon, "is that?" "It's for him," said Petunia, and her voice came out wrong, thin and high. "It's Vernon, it's one of theirs." Vernon Dursley's face went through several colors in a short time, and Harry watched them arrive and depart with the detached interest of a scientist. Red first, the ordinary red of Vernon confronted with a bill or a bad driver. Then underneath the red, when he understood what Petunia meant by theirs, a gray that matched the envelope, because Vernon was a coward the way most bullies are, brave against the small and quick to fold against anything that might actually cost him. He reached out one thick hand and turned the envelope over with a single finger, the way a man turns over a dead thing in the road to see what killed it, and he read the green ink, and Harry, standing very still by the door, read it too, upside down, because Harry could read upside down and had never told anyone that either. To the warden. Harry did not know what a warden was. But the word went into him and struck the warm coin shape under his ribs like a hammer struck a bell, and the warmth answered it, spreading, filling him from the sternum outward with a heat that had nothing to do with the cold kitchen, and he understood, in the wordless certain way a child understands that the ground is solid, that the letter was addressed to him, and that warden was somehow more his name than Harry was. "Burn it," said Vernon. "You can't," said Harry. It was the first thing he had said, and it came out before he had decided to say it, and the whole kitchen turned to look at him, and Harry, who had made a religion of never being noticed, found that he did not much mind being noticed just this once. "You can't burn it," he said again, more carefully. "Look at the paper. It isn't paper. Ordinary paper burns and turns to ash, but that's been treated somehow. It's too heavy." And when Aunt Petunia touched it, she pulled her hand back, which means it's warm, and things that are warm on their own don't burn the way you want them to. And it's addressed to a room in this house. If you burn a letter addressed to this house, and it's from the sort of people who can find the room under the stairs without ever having been here, then they'll know you burned it, and they'll come to ask why. He paused and finished the thought aloud, because he had learned that Uncle Vernon could sometimes be steered if you gave him a way to be right while doing what you wanted. "It's safer to let me open it, then whatever it says, it's my fault, not yours." There was a silence in the kitchen that had a great deal of history in it. Petunia was looking at Harry, and she was seeing him, which, in a sense that mattered, she had never once done before. She had seen a chore, a shame, a resemblance to a dead sister she could not forgive for dying. She had not, until this exact gray morning, seen the thing that had been quietly assembling itself in the cupboard under her stairs for 7 years, a mind, cold and clean and patient, that noticed everything and said almost none of it. "Open it," she said before Vernon could speak. "In the cupboard, not at my table." Harry took the envelope into the cupboard and closed the door, because the cupboard was the only place in the house that was his, and if his life was about to change, he wanted it to change somewhere that belonged to him. The seal on the back was red wax, and pressed into the wax was a device he had seen before, 3 nights running, at the bottom of a stair in a dream, an open hand, palm up, and above it a single star. When his thumb touched the wax, the seal grew warm, and then it did not break so much as recognize him and let go, the two halves parting cleanly, and the letter unfolded itself in his hands with a dry whisper of moving vellum. He read it twice. It was written in the same too-even green hand, and it did not waste words. "To Harry James Potter, called the Warden, greetings from Gringotts. You do not know us, and you do not yet know yourself. Both of these things are about to change, and we would rather they changed in our keeping than in the keeping of those who will come after us once the news is loose. An instrument of your family, older than your family, has woken. It is lawful, it is ancient, and it is yours, and by a compact that binds this bank, we are required to place it in your understanding now that you have come to 7 winters. We hold also the right to read your blood, and no wizard living may forbid it, which means that no one in the house where you are kept may prevent your coming to us. We do not tell you this as a threat. We tell you because you are a person who will want to know exactly how the ground lies, and it lies in your favor. A member of this bank will call for you at noon. Come as you are, bring nothing. You already carry the only thing that matters, and you have carried it since before you were born." It was signed with a single word in letters larger than the rest, Vornak. Harry sat in the dark of the cupboard with the letter open on his knees, and he did the thing he always did with new information, which was to take it apart and see how it fit together. You do not yet know yourself, an instrument older than your family, the right to read your blood. He turned the phrases over as he would a knot of string, patiently looking for the end he could pull. He did not believe it exactly because he had learned not to believe anything that was too good, and a letter that told a cupboard child he was somebody was very nearly the definition of too good. But he had also learned to tell the difference between a lie and a truth by their texture, and this letter had the texture of a truth. Lies flattered. This did not flatter. It told him he did not know himself, and that news was about to become dangerous, and that people worse than the writer were coming. That was not how you baited a trap for a hopeful child. That was how you briefed a soldier. You already carry the only thing that matters. He pressed his palm to the warm place under his ribs. The warmth pressed back once, gentle and certain, like a hand closing over a hand. All right, he said aloud, to the letter or to the warmth or to whatever it was at the bottom of the dream stair that had been waiting for him. All right, noon. At noon precisely the doorbell rang, and when Vernon flung it open with the bluster of a man determined to win the argument he had lost that morning, he found on his step a creature that came up to his belt buckle and looked at him with eyes the color of old iron and an expression that had been refusing to be impressed by large loud humans since before England had a king. "Vernon Dursley," said Vornak. It was not a question. "I am here for the warden. You will produce him." Vornak wore a long coat of oiled black leather over clothes cut close and dark, and he carried in one hand a slim rod of what looked like blued steel and was not, and a leather case on a strap across his body, and he had, folded and sealed in an inner pocket, a writ that Vernon could not read but would none the less obey, because Vornak had spent 91 years learning exactly how much force a sentence needed to carry and had never once used more. "Now see here," Vernon began. "I don't know what you people, you do not," Vornak agreed. "That is the difficulty, and it is not mine. This is a lawful reading of the blood of an heir, exercised by the bank that holds his estate, and it is not subject to your permission, your objection, or your understanding. You may stand aside, in which case the child returns to you this evening, and your ignorance continues undisturbed. Or you may obstruct me, in which case I invoke the writ, and the writ is enforced by people considerably less patient than I am, and your ignorance ends this afternoon in ways you will find memorable." He tilted his head a fraction. "I recommend the first. It requires nothing of you but a door already open." Behind Vernon, in the shadow of the hall, Petunia had one hand pressed flat to the wall. "Let him go, Vernon," she said low. "Let him go. It's Gringotts. You can't. Nobody says no to Gringotts, not even the ones like her. Let him go and let him come back, and let's pretend it never happened." "He'll come back," Vernon demanded of the goblin, and there was, buried under the bluster, something that in a better man might have passed for care, and in Vernon was mostly about the neighbors and the paperwork. "You'll bring him back. I won't have the neighbors seeing. He will come back this evening by the same road unremarked," said Vornak. "The neighbors will see nothing. We are, of all the peoples of the earth, the best at being seen only when we wish it." He looked past Vernon then into the hall and found Harry standing at the foot of the stairs, small and thin and watchful in Dudley's outgrown clothes, with the gray envelope's letter folded into a neat square in one hand. Their eyes met. Something passed between the ancient curse-breaker and the 7-year-old that neither of them would have been able to name and did not try to. "Warden," said Vornak, and inclined his head, a bare degree, the exact courtesy owed by a servant of the compact to the one the compact served. "Are you ready?" "Yes," said Harry. Walked past his uncle, who stepped back without meaning to, and out into the July light, and he did not look back at the house, and no one in the house said goodbye, and he found that this bothered him less than the fact that a creature out of an impossible story had just bowed to him and called him by the name that had struck the bell under his ribs. "You bowed," Harry said when they had reached the pavement. "I did. People don't bow to me. People don't do anything to me. That's rather the point of me." He said it without self-pity, as a scientist reports a measurement. "So either you've got the wrong child, or I'm not who I've been told I am, and you don't strike me as someone who gets things wrong." Vornak stopped walking. He looked down at the child on the gray pavement of the grayest street in England, and for the first time since he had opened Vault 687 he felt something loosen in his 91-year-old chest that he had not known was clenched. "No," he said. "I do not get things wrong, and you are not who you have been told you are. Come. It is a long way down to where the truth is kept, and it is best that you see it with your own eyes, because you are the sort who will not believe it otherwise, and you are right not to." They did not take a car. Vornak led him to a gap between two houses that Harry had walked past 1,000 times and had never noticed could be walked into, and then there was a wrenching, folding sensation, as though the world had been a sheet of paper and someone had brought two distant corners of it together, and when it let go they were standing in the mouth of a crooked cobbled street under a sky that was somehow both the July sky he had left and a different one, older, with more room in it. Harry stood very still and looked. Had read about magic, of course. Every child reads about magic, and Harry had read more than most, in the corners of the school library where the older books were kept and no one checked to see what a small boy was doing there. but reading about magic and standing in it were as different as reading about the sea and being lifted off your feet by a wave, and Harry, who had trained himself for 7 years to show nothing, stood in the mouth of Diagon Alley and let his face do, briefly, whatever it wanted. There was a shop with a window full of owls, real owls, awake in daylight, turning their heads to watch the street. There was a cauldron the size of a bathtub sitting on the pavement with steam coming off it that formed, unhurried, into slow shapes and drifted apart. There was a witch in robes the color of a beetle's back haggling with a man over a crate of something that rattled and occasionally hissed. There was a broom in a window on a stand, roped off, with a card beside it, and a knot of boys older than Harry pressed to the glass looking at it as he supposed boys were meant to look at things, and Harry looked at it too, and understood with a lurch that it was a broom for flying, that the flying motorcycle in his one repeating good dream had not been a dream at all but a memory, that everything, all of it, the whole impossible street was real, and had always been real, and had been going on 4 streets and 1 folded corner away from his cupboard for the whole of his life. "You are doing arithmetic," Vornak observed. He had been watching Harry rather than the street. "I can see it. Stop for a moment and simply look. The sums will keep." "I'm not doing arithmetic," Harry said, and then, because Vornak had not lied to him yet and it seemed a poor way to repay it, "I'm doing arithmetic. I'm working out how long it's been real without me. My whole life, I think." "That's the sum. It's been here my whole life and no one told me." He looked up. Why didn't anyone tell me? It was not a child's petulant why. It was a genuine question put to the one adult who had so far answered his questions straight, and Vornak, who did not soften things and did not intend to start, gave it the straight answer. "Because you were hidden," he said. "By people who meant well, and by a piece of your history I will let older and wiser fools than I explain to you when they dare. You were hidden well, it is why you are alive. But hiding a thing and lying to it are close cousins, and you have been on the wrong end of both, and you are owed some truth to make up the balance. You will get it today. All of it that we have. Walk, the truth is downstairs." At the end of the alley, up a flight of white steps, between 2 burnished bronze doors, stood a building of snow-white marble that leaned very slightly, tired or settled over centuries, into the ground it guarded. Above the doors were words cut into the stone, and Harry read them as he climbed, and they raised the fine hairs on his arms. "Enter, stranger, but take heed of what awaits the sin of greed." "Is that a warning?" he asked. "It is a promise," said Vornak, and the doors opened. Down. The word Vornak had used, and it was the right one. They passed through the marble hall where goblins sat at high desks weighing gems and stamping ledgers, and every long iron-colored face turned briefly as Harry passed and returned to its work, and Harry noticed the turning and understood that it meant something and did not yet know what. They passed through an inner door and the marble ended, and there was a rough stone landing and a set of rails running down into black and a cart, and then there was a plunge that took Harry's stomach and left it several floors above him. The cart shrieking down through the dark past the mouths of passages and the glow of far-off torches, and once a rush of heat and a sound like a bellows the size of a house that Vornak did not explain and Harry did not ask about, though he stored it. They went deeper than the cart in the end. They left it at a landing where the air changed, and they went on foot down a passage where the rock stopped being black and became a deep and lightless blue, and the walls were cut in the shapes of moons, and Harry, who had been keeping up a running catalogue of impossible things all day, stopped cataloguing because he had begun to recognize where he was. "I've seen this," he said. His voice was very quiet in the blue passage. "The moons, I've dreamed this 3 nights. Down and down, and the walls are moons, and at the bottom there's—" "Not yet," said Vornak. "Not today. Today you go into the room where the writing is kept, and you meet the ones who found you, and you put 1 drop of your blood on a seal your ancestor made 1,000 years ago, and we all find out together whether a thing this bank has guarded since before England had a king has come home to a child or to a mistake. The door at the bottom of your dream can wait. It has waited 1,000 years. Wait a day more." He stopped at a plain iron door set in the blue stone and laid his hand on it. "Are you afraid?" Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. He found, when he looked, that the warmth under his ribs had spread until it filled him to the fingertips, and that his hands were steady, and that the cool blue passage felt less like a strange place he had been brought to and more like a house he had been away from a long time. "No," he said. "I keep waiting to be, but no." "Good," said Vornak, and opened the door. "Neither is the thing that has been waiting for you. Come and meet your name." The room beyond the iron door was round and low and lined floor to ceiling with drawers of dark wood, each no wider than a hand, each labeled in the small even script of the goblins, and in the center of it stood a table of black stone, and on the table lay the bog oak casket, open. 3 goblins waited by the table. Harry took them in as he took in everything, quickly and completely and without seeming to. The nearest was younger than Vornak and stood with the loose readiness of someone who worked with his hands. He was watching Harry with frank curiosity and made no attempt to hide it. The second was so old that age had stopped being a number and become a texture, his eyes clouded to river ice, his long fingers resting on the open lid of the casket. The third was lean and still and dressed in gray, and he watched Harry the way a man watches a coin he is about to weigh to see whether it will come out true. Warden, said Vornak, you stand in the deep record room of Gringotts, which few of your kind have entered and fewer have left knowing what they saw. This is Ripnot, who found the thing that woke. This is Agner, keeper of seals, who is older than the question you are about to answer. This is Gornuk, who speaks the law of this bank. They found you. Now you will find yourself. You found me, Harry repeated. He looked at Ripnot. How? I've been in the same cupboard for 6 years. Nobody found me because nobody was looking. The seal was looking, said Ripnot, and there was something in his voice that was not quite laughter and not quite awe. You woke it, 3 days ago, near enough. I put my finger next to a box that had sat cold in the dark for 1,000 years, and it was warm, because somewhere above our heads a child was 3 days short of 7, and his blood had begun, all on its own, to call to the thing his family swore to guard. We didn't find you, Warden. You rang like a bell, and we came running toward the sound. Harry crossed to the table. He was too short to see well over its edge, and Vornak, without being asked, set a low wooden stool beside it, and Harry stepped up onto the stool so that he stood level with the open casket, and he looked down into it. Inside, on a bed of black cloth gone soft with age, lay a single folded sheet of vellum, and it was covered edge to edge in writing so old that Harry could not read a word of it, and along its lower margin ran 5 seals. 4 of them were pressed in colored wax gone dark with the centuries, and each bore a device he half knew from the strange feeling they gave him: a lion, an eagle, a badger, a serpent. The 5th seal was not wax. It was set directly into the vellum, dark and dull, and it bore an open hand with a star above it, and it was the only thing in the casket that was warm. He could feel the warmth of it from a foot away, on the skin of his face, the way you feel a banked fire in a cold room. The Charter of the Vigil, said Gornuk, speaking for the first time in the flat and formal register the goblins kept for law. Written and sealed in the 9th day of the 10th month of the year 993, by the 4 who built the school in the north, and by the first of your line, whom the Charter names only as the Warden. 4 of these seals are the Founder's own. The 5th is the Warden's, and it is a blood seal, and it has slept for 3 centuries, because for 3 centuries there was no living Warden's blood beneath the sky to wake it. It is awake now. It has been awake for 3 days. It woke because you turned 7, and by the terms written on this page, the guardianship of your family passes into the understanding of its heir at 7 winters and not before. He looked at Harry with his weighing look. There is one thing this bank cannot know from the outside, Warden, and it is the only thing that matters. The seal is warm. Warm means a true heir lives and is near, but warm is not the same as true. A cousin's blood, a distant thinning of the line, can warm a seal a little. Only the true Warden, the unbroken thread, can wake it fully, so we do not take your name on trust. We ask the seal. You want my blood, Harry said. It was not a question, because the letter had already told him. Drop on the hand and star. 1 drop, Gornuk agreed. Freely given, it must be freely given. A Warden's blood taken by force answers nothing, which is a mercy you will come to value. Agner will guide the reading. You may refuse. If you refuse, we take you home this evening and you never hear from us again, and the door at the bottom of your dream stays shut for another 1,000 years, and no one will blame you because you are 7, and no one has ever asked you to decide anything that mattered. His gray eyes did not blink. But I do not think you will refuse. I have watched you since you came through that door, and you have not once looked at the way out. Harry looked at the warm seal, the open hand cut into 1,000-year-old vellum, the same hand that had waited for him at the bottom of the blue stair in 3 nights of dreaming. He thought about the cupboard and the years of being no one, and the letter that had not flattered him, and the warmth under his ribs that had been on his side since before he could name it. It isn't a hard decision, he said. You've all been very careful to make it sound like one, and I think that's because you're honest, and honest people warn you before they change your life. But it isn't hard. Something's been waiting for me my whole life. I'm not going to walk back up the stairs and pretend I never heard it calling. He held out his left hand, palm up, the same shape as the seal. How do we do this? Agner moved for the first time. He lifted from the table a needle of dark metal, no longer than a thorn, and he did not take Harry's hand, but held the needle out on his open palm so that Harry could take it himself. Your blood, the old goblin said in a voice like stone settling. Your hand, your choice. The Founders built it so that no Warden could ever be made against his will, and so that no Warden could ever pretend he was made against it. 1 drop on the star. Then be silent, all of you, and let the old work do what it will. Harry took the needle. He pricked the side of his own thumb once cleanly, as he had learned to do quiet, necessary things without fuss, and a bead of red welled up, and he pressed his thumb to the dark seal, to the open hand and the star, and gave it 1 drop of himself. For a moment nothing happened. The room held its breath, 5 ancient creatures and 1 small child around a black stone table a mile beneath London. Then the seal drank. The drop of red did not sit on the surface and dry. It sank all at once into the dark metal as water sinks into sand, and the metal took it and turned from within the color of a coal at the heart of a fire, and the light of it came up through the vellum so that the old writing stood out black against a spreading rose-gold glow, every letter suddenly legible, not because Harry had learned the tongue, but because the Charter had decided in that instant to be understood by the one it was written for. The warmth that had lived under his ribs for 3 days rose up through his chest and down his arm and out through the pricked thumb and into the seal, and the seal answered it, and the two warmths met and knew each other and became one warmth that filled the room, and the four founders' seals, the lion and the eagle and the badger and the serpent, each in turn caught the glow and burned briefly bright, as though four long-dead hands had reached across 1,000 years to lay themselves, one after another, over the hand of a child and confirm him. A sound came up from somewhere very far below. It was not loud. It came through the blue rock the way the note of a struck bell comes through the beam it hangs from, and it was unmistakably the sound of something enormous and patient and long-awaited, waking at the far end of a dream and turning at last toward home. The glow ebbed, the seal cooled to a warm ember, the room came back to itself. Ripnot was the first to speak, and his voice was not steady. "It's him," he said to no one, to everyone. "Ancestors keep us. It's actually him." Gornuk had gone very still. Agnar's blind face was turned toward Harry, and down the deep runnels of the old goblin's cheeks ran a wet brightness that no one remarked upon and no one ever would. And Vornak, who did not soften things, put one hand on the black stone table to steady himself, because 91 years is a long time to guard a door you never expect to see opened, and then to stand in the room where the key turns. "Warden of the Vigil," said Gornuk, and this time he did not weigh the word. He bent his lean gray body forward from the waist, slow and full and formal, the deepest bow Harry had yet been given, and around the table the others bent with him, even Vornak, even the ancient keeper. "The seal has answered, the thread is unbroken. The bank knows you now, and the bank does not forget, and from this hour the compact that has bound us for 1,000 years binds us to you." He straightened. "You wanted to know why the faces turned when you crossed the hall upstairs. Now you know. They did not know your name, but old magic runs in the stone of this place, and every goblin in that hall felt something wake beneath their feet as you passed over it, and did not know what it was, and turned to look at the small human it was following. His mouth did the almost nothing that served the goblins for a smile. It was following you home." Harry stood on his wooden stool with his pricked thumb held against his shirt and the whole impossible weight of it settling onto his 7-year-old shoulders, and he did the thing he always did, which was to take it apart and see how it fit together. But there was nothing to take apart. For once in his life there was only a fact whole and warm in his, that something had been waiting for him and had found him and had bowed. "All right," he said quietly to the ember of the seal. It was the third time he had said it that day, and each time it had meant more. "All right, tell me everything, from the beginning. What am I, and what am I supposed to guard, and who's going to try to take it from me? Because there's always someone. That's the one rule that's never let me down." Vornak straightened from the table, and his iron-colored eyes met Gornuk's over the child's head, and a great deal passed between the two old goblins in that look, most of it a variation on the thought that had been troubling the bank since the seal first warmed, that the warden was everything they could have hoped, clever and calm and unbreakable, and that his last question was exactly the right one, and that they did not yet have a good answer to it. "We will tell you everything," said Vornak. "But not here and not all at once, and not before we have eaten, because you are 7 and thin and you have had a longer day than most grown men survive. And a warden thinks poorly on an empty stomach. Come up, there is a room, there is food, and there is a great deal of history, most of it yours, and some of it, I am afraid, already moving against you, though it does not yet know your name." He offered the child his hand off the stool, an old curse-breaker to a young warden, and Harry took it. "You asked who would try to take it. That is the right question. Hold on to it. You will need it sooner than any of us would like." In a warmer room, in a lamplit study far from any blue passage, a man named Aurelian Rook was reading a letter that had come to him by an owl he did not own, from a clerk he did not employ but paid, and he was smiling, and no one who knew him would have found that reassuring. He was a tall man of 60, spare and immaculate, with silver hair worn long and swept back, and hands that he kept beautifully, because a man's hands, he believed, were the true measure of his seriousness. He had been an unspeakable once in the Department of Mysteries, in the division that studied old things, and he had left it decades ago, not because his interest had failed, but because his interest had outgrown the small licensed portion of it that the ministry permitted a man to keep. In the years since he had assembled, at enormous cost and in perfect secrecy, the finest private collection of relics of the founding age in Britain, and every piece in it was a disappointment, because every piece in it was dead. A cup that had once been Helga Hufflepuff's, verified, priceless, and inert. A page in Rowan a Ravenclaw's own hand, magnificent and silent. He had spent 40 years and the better part of a fortune learning that the relics of the founders, the true ones, the great ones, did not answer to gold, or to scholarship, or to the reverence of a man who understood them better than any living soul. They answered to blood or to nothing, and he did not have the blood, and so they gave him nothing, and he had come to hate them a little, the way one hates a beautiful person who will not look at you. The letter in his beautiful hands changed that. It was 3 sentences long because his clerk was well trained. It said that Gringotts had that morning exercised, for the first time in living memory, an ancient right to read the blood of a minor heir. It said that the reading concerned an instrument described in the internal record only as woken and only as of the founding age. And it said that the heir was a child of 7 named Harry Potter, the same Harry Potter whose name Aurelian Rook, like every literate wizard in Britain, knew from the newspapers of 6 years before. Rook set the letter down on the green leather of his desk, and he squared its edges with the tips of 2 fingers until it lay perfectly parallel to the edge of the blotter, because disorder in small things was the beginning of disorder in large ones, and he aligned his thoughts as he aligned his papers. A relic of the founding age, woken, that word did the work of 100 others. In 40 years he had never once seen the word woken in any record because the relics did not wake, they slept. They had slept since the founders died, and the whole tragedy of his collection was that he had never held a waking one. And now the bank, the careful, silent, incorruptible bank, had used a right it had not exercised in living memory, spent that much of its dignity, to bring in one small child. They did not do such things for a trinket. They did such things for the thing itself, the great thing, the thing his whole ruined life of scholarship had been a courtship of, and it had woken for a blood that was not his, in a child who did not know what he was holding, in a world that had left that child in the keeping of muggles who would not have known a founding relic from a soup tureen. Blood, said Rook quietly to the empty study. It always comes down to blood. And blood, he added, and now he was smiling again, the smile that no one who knew him found reassuring, is such a fragile thing, so easily brought to a place, so easily persuaded, so easily, if it comes to that, spilled onto whatever one requires it to touch. He drew a fresh sheet of paper toward him and uncapped a pen. Seelas, he wrote at the top in a hand far less even than the goblin's and far more patient. I have found it at last. Come to me, bring your quiet tools. We are going to meet a 7-year-old. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. The charter of the vigil they fed him first, which Harry would remember for the rest of his life because no one had ever fed him first. The room they brought him to was small and warm and windowless, paneled in the same dark wood as the record drawers, with a round table and chairs sized for goblins and one chair, plainly newly conjured, sized for a thin human child of 7. On the table was a spread that a person raised on the scrapings of Dudley's plate could not have imagined. A brown loaf still warm enough to steam when it was torn, a wheel of hard pale cheese, cold roast fowl, apples cut and browning at the edges, a jug of something amber and cloudy that turned out to be cider so cold it made his teeth ache. Harry ate the way a careful animal eats, quickly and without waste, watching the door, and the goblins let him, and did not talk at him while he did it, and that too he would remember. When the worst of the hunger had gone out of him and he had slowed to the pace of a person eating rather than a person storing, Gornuk folded his long hands on the table and began. You asked us to tell you everything from the beginning, the law speaker said. The beginning is 1,000 years ago, and it is not a story we tell because we do not tell this story, because until 3 days ago there was no one alive with the right to hear it. So understand what is happening in this room. We are not doing you a kindness. A kindness can be refused and taken back. We are paying a debt, and a goblin debt is a heavier thing than a kindness, and it does not soften and it does not expire, and it has been accruing interest for 1,000 years. He looked at Harry with his weighing gray eyes. Attend, Warden, you will not be told this twice. Harry set down the heel of bread he had been eating. He gave the law speaker the whole of his attention, which was a considerable thing and had never in 7 years been given to anyone who wanted it. There were 4 of them, Gornuk said. You have felt their marks already on the charter, though you did not know the feeling for what it was. Godric of the Wild West country, who was fire. Rowena of the northern glens, who was thought made visible. Helga of the broad valleys, who was the earth that keeps in the hearth that does not go out. Salazar of the fen and the estuary, who was the deep water and the long patience of it. They built a school which you will hear about from others. But before the school and beneath it, and holding it up the way a keel holds up a ship, they did a thing that no 4 of their kind had done before or have done since. They pooled their magic. Not mixed it the way children mix paints to make mud, pooled it the way 4 rivers pool to make a lake that is larger and stranger and deeper than the sum of the 4. Vornak spoke from Harry's left, quiet and exact. That is the part your histories do not have. The founders are remembered for what they built above. This bank remembers what they made below because they came down into the dark to make it, and they came to us because we were already old when they were young, and they needed the one thing our people have always been able to promise and keep, silence and a guard that does not sleep. What did they make? Harry asked. The 3 old goblins were quiet for a moment, and it was Agner, the blind keeper, who answered, and when he spoke the register of the room changed, the sharp, dry law of it giving way to something older and rounder and full of dark air. They made a stone, Agner said. Understand me, Warden, when I say a stone, and do not let the smallness of the word deceive you, for the founders chose a small and humble word for it on purpose, that greed might pass it by. It was not quarried, it fell. In the year before they built, a star came down out of the northern sky and buried itself in the high moors, and it burned in the peat for a season, and when it had cooled, Rowena went up alone and found it and knew it for what it was. A piece of the outside of the great cold dark between the lights come down into the warm small world. She carried it home in her 2 hands, and the 4 of them, in the deep of a winter, wrought it. Rowena gave it shape, for shaping thought was her gift, and Godric gave it fire so that it would never be cold again, and Helga gave it keeping so that it would hold what was put into its care past the wearing of centuries, and Salazar gave it patience, the deep long patience of still water, so that it could wait and wait and wait longer than any living thing for the hour it was needed. His clouded eyes turned toward Harry, and into it, all 4 of them together, they bound a vigil. A vigil, Harry repeated. The word had a shape in his mouth he did not have a use for yet. A watch that does not end, said Agner. A guarding that outlives its guardian. They knew what they had made, this school in the north, this gathering of children who would grow into the whole future of our magic, and they knew it would be attacked in their lives and past their lives and down all the centuries, by every hunger the world could raise against a thing worth having. So they made the stone to be its last shelter. Not a wall, walls fall, a vigil. When it wakes and is commanded rightly, the stone raises about whatever its keeper names a dome of the old starfire, and within that dome no force can pass that the keeper has not welcomed, and no harm can come to any soul the keeper has named as his own. It is not a weapon, it cannot strike, it can only shelter. But there is no shelter in the world to equal it, for it was made of the outside dark by the 4 greatest hands our people ever grew, and it answers to nothing but blood and love, which are the 2 things that cannot be counterfeited. He was silent a moment. They called it the Vigil Stone, and they knew, being wise, that a thing so great could not be left to guard itself, for a stone cannot choose whom to shelter. It needs a hand, it needs a heart to name the ones it saves, it needs a warden. Harry sat very still in his conjured chair, a mile beneath London, with cider going warm and forgotten in front of him, and something enormous turned over slowly in his chest. Me, he said. You, said Gornuk, but not for the reason a child would guess. Attend, because this is the part that matters, and it is the part that will keep you alive. They could have kept the stone themselves, Gornuk said. They could have given it to the school, locked it in the highest tower, set the whole Wisengam of their age to guard it. They did none of these things. Do you understand why? Harry thought about it. He had been thinking about it since Agner stopped speaking, turning it over as he did with everything, and the answer, when it came, felt less like a guess than like a thing he was remembering. Because anything you can find, someone can take, he said slowly. A tower has a door. A council has men in it, and men can be bought or frightened or replaced. If you put the stone somewhere important, then everyone knows where it is, and everyone knows who to threaten to get at it. So they did the opposite. He looked up at the law speaker, and there was a thing in his face that made the 3 old goblins glance at one another. They hid it in a person, in a bloodline. Somewhere no one would think to look, because who guards the most precious thing in the world by giving it to an ordinary family and telling them to shut up about it? Go on, said Vornak very quietly. And they didn't tell the family everything, did they? Or they didn't keep telling them down the years, because a secret every generation knows is a secret that gets out. They keyed it to blood, so the family didn't even have to remember. The blood remembers. And they said it to wake up at 7 in a child, because Harry stopped. His clever face worked. Because a child can't be corrupted yet. A grown man who knows he's the warden of the greatest relic in the world, that man can be bought. He'd have his whole life to be tempted. But a 7-year-old doesn't know enough to be dangerous, and hasn't lived long enough to be bought, and no enemy in the world thinks to look for the keeper of a founder's relic in a small child who doesn't know his own name. He sat back. It's a hiding place inside a hiding place inside a hiding place. It's the cleverest thing I've ever heard of. Ripnot, who had been leaning in the doorway with the frank open curiosity he had not once bothered to conceal, made a sound that was not quite a word. 91 years, said Vornak, to no one in particular, I have been explaining the founder's work to apprentices, and I have never once had one of them explain it back to me before I had finished the explaining. He turned his iron-colored eyes on Harry. You are correct in every particular, Warden, and you reasoned it out from 3 facts and a jug of cider, and I want you to notice that you did that, and to remember that you can, because the day is coming and coming soon when your cleverness will be the only thing standing between you and people who want what you carry. Now, the forensic part, you will like this. It is the part I did myself. He drew from his leather case a slip of vellum, the same one he had laid before the director, and set it on the table where Harry could see, a single red line running unbroken from top to bottom, forking and thinning, ending in a name. The blood ledger, Vornak said, the great genealogy of everyone who has ever held gold with this bank, drawn in a line that is alive and cannot be forged. When the seal warmed in the Potter vault, I did the only thing a curse-breaker can do with a mystery, which is to run it backward until it stops surprising me. The Potter line runs clean for 6 centuries. Before that it runs into the Peverills, 3 brothers and their get, a family your histories tell strange tales about. Before that it thins, and I followed the thinning through names with no living descendants but this one, down through the plague years, when a third of the wizarding families in Britain went out like candles in a draught, down through the Goblin Wars, when whole lines were ended in a season, all the way to the founding time. And here's the thing, Warden, the thing that made me sit down when I found it. He put his finger on the top of the red line at the very beginning. The Warden's line does not fail. Every history this bank holds says it failed in the plague or the wars, and the door on the old deep became a duty with no reason. But the ledger does not lie, and the ledger says the thread runs unbroken. It only went under a different name. The way a river goes under a mountain and comes out the far side, and everyone calls it a new river because they never saw it go in. It came out as the Potters, Harry said. It came out as the Potters. Your family has been guarding the greatest relic of the founding age for 1,000 years, and for most of that 1,000 years your family did not know it because that was the design and the design held. Vornak tapped the name at the bottom of the line. Harry leaned over the vellum and his eyes moved up the red thread, not down it, and he stopped at a place where the line went briefly pale, almost to nothing, and then ran strong again. There, he said, pointing without touching. It nearly goes out, right there. What happened? Vornak looked at where the child was pointing and was quiet a moment, because it was the exact place he himself had stopped when he first read the ledger, and no apprentice had ever found it unshown. The plague years, he said. That pale stretch is a single life, one child in a bad winter in a family that had already buried the rest. If that one child had died, the thread ended, and the warden line ended with it, and the vigil would have slept in the dark forever with no hand left to wake it. The whole of your inheritance, warden, 1,000 years of it, the door and the stone and the star that fell out of the sky, all of it runs through the eye of that one needle, that one small life that did not end when it should have. He looked up. You noticed it because it was the weakest point in the record, and the weakest point in a record is always where the truth of it lives. That is the whole of curse breaking if you want it in a sentence. Do not look at where the line is strong, look at where it almost breaks. That is where someone will try to break it again. Harry looked at the pale place in the thread a moment longer, at the one life that had nearly not been, and then at his own name at the bottom. So the design held, he said. But only just it held by one child once. That's not a wall, that's luck wearing a wall's coat. He straightened. I'd want to know the weak places in it, all of them, before someone else finds them for me. Yes, said Vornak, and there was something in the flat old voice that had not been there that morning. You would, and that is precisely why you are going to survive this, and precisely why I am going to teach you. Until you turned 7 and the blood remembered and the seal warmed, and an old goblin's apprentice put his finger against a box that had no business being warm. The design held for 1,000 years, and now it is over because now you know, and now we know, and knowledge does not go back in the box. Gornuk drew the charter itself toward him then in its casket, and though he did not touch the vellum he read from it, and the reading was the reading of law, flat and exact, and Harry listened to every word. You should know the terms you were born under, the law speaker said, because a man who does not know his own contract is a man who will be cheated of it, and you will be tested on these before you are much older, though not by us. The charter has 4 clauses that matter, and a 5th that is not a clause but an oath. The first you have met, the clause of 7 winters. The guardianship wakes in the air at 7 years and not before, that no child too young to understand may carry it, and no heir too old to be shaped may escape it. You are inside that clause now. It has already done its work on you. He moved his finger down the glowing lines without touching them. The second is the clause of free naming, and it is the heart of the whole instrument, so hear it well. The vigil shelters only those the warden freely names as his own, freely. It will not shelter a name given under duress, and it will not, this is the mercy the founders built in against exactly the kind of man who is at this hour making plans against you. It will not answer to a warden whose hand is forced. Blood taken by force wakes nothing. A name spoken with a knife at the throat shelters no one. The stone knows the difference between a gift and a theft because it was made of the outside dark by the 4 who understood that the only power worth guarding is the power that cannot be stolen, only given. So they can't make me use it, Harry said slowly. Even if they catch me, even if they hurt me, the stone won't work for them because it can tell the difference. They cannot make you use it, Gornuk agreed. Which will not regrettably stop them from trying, because men who covet do not read the terms carefully. They believe the rules are for other men. But yes, that is the shape of your protection, and it is a strange shape, and you must understand it exactly. The vigil cannot be commanded out of you. It can only be given out of you, which means the danger to you is not that they will steal the stone. They cannot. The danger is that they will spend a very long time and do a great deal of harm learning that they cannot. He let that settle and then went on. The third clause is the clause of no sovereign. The vigil belongs to no crown, no council, no ministry, no coin. It cannot be owned, taxed, licensed, requisitioned, or held in trust by any power on the earth. It can only be guarded by blood in the person of the warden. Remember that clause, because within the day a gray man in a gray office is going to file a paper claiming the opposite, and the paper will be wrong, and being wrong will not stop him either. And the fourth is not a protection, it is a price. Gornuk's gray eyes did not blink. The clause of the standing watch. A warden who has claimed his charge may put the vigil down only once, and only by dying, and it passes to the next of the blood, and so it has gone for 1,000 years, hand to hand, down the red thread, though most of those hands never knew they held it. When you claim it fully, Warden, and you have not yet, you take a watch that ends when you end. It is not a gift we give you gladly. It is a truth we owe you plainly. The founders did not make the Warden's office to be a reward. They made it to be a duty that a good heart would carry and a bad heart could not lift. He closed the casket gently over the ember of the seal. And the fifth thing, the oath, you will speak at the door if the door lets you, in words no goblin has ever heard, because they are the Warden's alone. We cannot teach it to you. We do not know it. You will know it, we think, when the door asks, because the blood remembers what the tongue was never told. That is all. That is your contract. You have been a party to it since before you were born, and now, at last, you have read it. They took him afterward only as far as the mouth of the blue passage, because Gornuk would not permit more. He should see it, Vornak had argued, and Harry, who was learning the shapes of these goblins as he had once learned the shapes of the Dursleys, understood that Vornak arguing openly was itself a rare event. He dreamed his way to the old deep 3 nights running before he knew this bank existed. The door is his, he has more right to stand before it than any goblin living. He has every right to stand before it, Gornuk had answered, and no protection worth the name, and it is the 3rd day since the seal woke, and I do not know yet who else has felt it wake. He will see it when we can put a wall of our people between him and the whole hungry world, and not 1 hour before. Bring him to the mouth of the passage, let him look down. That is all I will allow, and I allow that only because I am not made of stone, whatever the humans say of us. So Harry stood at the mouth of the blue passage, where the black rock gave way to that deep and lightless blue, and looked down the long slope of it, and the walls were cut in the shapes of moons, waxing and waning away into the dark, exactly as they had been in the dream, exactly down to the particular gibbous moon 100 feet down that he had woken from 3 mornings, running with the shape of it printed behind his eyes. There's a door at the bottom, he said. It was not a question. There is, said Vornak beside him. A single slab of pale gray stone, set flush into the rock, no hinge, no handle, no lock. Across its face is cut an open hand with a star above it, the same mark that is on your charter and was on your envelope and is, I would wager, somewhere on you, though you cannot see it. This bank has guarded that door for 1,000 years under the compact, and in 1,000 years no goblin has opened it because no goblin can. It is not warded against us. It is worse than warded, it simply does not notice us. 400 years ago, the finest curse-breaker of his age spent 11 days trying to make it notice him, and on the 12th he sat down and understood that it was not a lock at all. Vornak paused. It is a promise, and a promise is not picked, it is kept, or it is broken, and it will open when it opens, to the one hand it was made for, and to no other, and by no force in the world. Harry looked down the long blue slope at the dark where the door waited, and he felt the warmth under his ribs lean toward it, the way a compass leans north, the way a child leans toward a lit window on a cold street. It's waiting for me, he said. In the dream, it's always waiting, patiently, like it knows I'll come. It has waited 1,000 years, said Vornak. It can wait until you are ready, and you are not ready, and I will tell you plainly why, because you are owed plainness. Blood may not be enough. The seal knew you by your blood, because the seal was made to find the warden, and blood is how you find a person. But the founders were not fools, and they knew that a warden could be born a coward or a brute or a greedy man, and that blood alone is a poor test of a heart. So there is more to the door than blood. There is, if the old records are true, a testing. What it tests and how, no goblin knows, because no goblin has ever passed the blood, let alone the test beyond it. You will be the first living soul in 1,000 years to stand where the door can see you. His iron-colored eyes found Harry's green ones, and that is precisely why we are not taking you down there today. A door that has waited 1,000 years is patient. The people who will come hunting you, once they learn what you are, will not be patient at all. They learned what he was that same afternoon, because a secret shared by 6 is not a secret, it is a fuse. And the fuse had been lit the moment a ministry liaison clerk named Mundy Threep, who kept a desk in the marble hall of Gringotts and sold what crossed it to anyone who paid, noticed a writ of blood reading pass through the day's filings and understood, from the fee attached and the level of authorization, that it was worth more than his salary to the right buyer. By evening the news had reached 2 men, and they were, between them, precisely the 2 kinds of danger Gornuk had counted on his fingers. The first was Aloysius Crane, and Crane received the news in his narrow office on the 4th floor of the Ministry of Magic in the Department of Magical Heritage, where he chaired a committee so obscure that most of the ministry had forgotten it existed, which suited Crane, because a forgotten committee is a committee no one thinks to check. The Committee for the Recovery of Founder Antiquities had been established a century before to catalogue, and where the public interest required, to take into the nations keeping any relic of the founding age that surfaced in private hands. In 100 years it had taken into the nations keeping exactly 3 objects, all of them fakes, and Aloysius Crane had spent 11 years of his life administering the recovery of nothing at all. He was a dry, gray, exact man, not cruel, not greedy in the way a fat man is greedy, but possessed of a hunger that was worse than either, the hunger of the functionary who has given his whole life to a mandate and never once been allowed to exercise it. When the note from Monday Threep reached him, Crane read it 3 times, and then he opened the bottom drawer of his desk where a document had lain ready for 11 years, wanting only a name and a date, and he uncapped his pen. An instrument of the founding age, he said to the empty office, filling in the blank in his careful civil service hand. Woken, in the possession, if the goblins are to be believed, of a child. He blotted the entry. The public interest, said Aloysius Crane, who had waited 11 years to say it and believe it, could hardly be clearer. The second man was Aurelian Rook, and Rook did not fill in a form. He was standing at the tall window of his study when Silas Vane arrived, and he did not turn around, because he had learned long ago that a man who does not turn around when another man enters is a man in command of the room, and being seen to command the room was, to Rook, half of every negotiation. Vane came in on quiet feet, as he did everything quietly. He was a broad, soft-spoken man of 40, with the ruined hands of a cursebreaker who had once been very good and the flat, patient eyes of a man who had stopped, some years ago, feeling the things that make hands shake. The guild had struck him from its rolls a decade before, for reasons the guild did not publish, and Rook had made it his business to learn, and a struck-off cursebreaker with a genius he was no longer permitted to use is, Rook had found, the most useful tool a patient man can own. Said you'd found it, Vane said. He did not sit. He never sat until Rook sat. I said I had found it at last, and I chose the word at last with care because you of all people will understand what 40 years of at last comes to. Rook turned from the window. In his beautiful hands he held a cup, an ancient golden cup chased with the device of a badger, and he set it down on the sill with the tenderness of a man setting down a sleeping child. This was Helga Hufflepuff's. It is genuine. I have 4 attestations, and I paid a fortune that would sicken you, and it is Silas dead, cold gold. I have spent my life assembling the finest collection of founding relics in Britain, and every one of them is a corpse, because the true magic of the founders answers to blood, and I do not have the blood, and no amount of scholarship or reverence or gold has ever once persuaded one of them to so much as warm in my hand. He came away from the window. And now the goblins have spent a rite they have not spent in living memory to bring in a 7-year-old whose blood woke something they will only call in their records of the founding age. Woken, Silas, not sleeping. Woken, do you understand what I am telling you? You're telling me, said Vane in his soft, flat voice, that there's a live one, and it answers to a child. It answers to a child, Rook agreed, which is to say it answers to a thing that is small and portable and easily frightened and easily brought to a place, and made with sufficient patience to lay its hand where one requires. I have spent 40 years failing to command dead gold. I am not going to spend the next 40 failing to command a living stone. He picked up the cold cup again and looked into it, at his own distorted reflection in the ancient metal. We are going to be very careful and very slow and very lawful for as long as lawful serves. I will meet this child. I will meet him as a scholar, friend of the family that isn't, a kindly old man with an interest in his welfare, because the goblins guard vaults Silas. They do not guard children, and a child raised by muggles who has just learned he is the most important person in the world is a child with no defense against an old man who is kind to him. He set the cup down. Find out where they keep him, find out everything, and Silas. His voice did not change, which was how Vane knew to take it seriously. Bring your quiet tools, not to use, to have. A patient man carries the knife he hopes never to draw. A mile beneath London, in the high round chamber where the founding compact hung in its case of goblin glass, the director of Gringotts heard the day's account and did not like the shape of it. A ministry filing before nightfall, Ragnarok said. You are certain. Threep sold the writ this morning, said Gornuk. I have known for an hour that the fee left his desk. I do not know yet who bought it, but I know it was bought twice, because a thing like that is always bought twice. Once by a man who wants it under law, and once by a man who wants it under no law at all. By tomorrow there will be a paper on some functionary's desk claiming the vigil for the nation, and it will be void because the clause of no sovereign is void-proof, and voidness will not stop them filing it or acting as though it holds. The law speaker set his hands flat on the table. We cannot keep the child a secret. That fuse is lit. What we can do is decide what he is when the wolves reach him. A frightened, ignorant 7-year-old is prey. A trained one is not. You want to teach him. I want to arm him with the only weapons that will serve a child who cannot yet lift a wand, said Gornuk. Not spellcraft. He is too young, and it is not our craft to teach. I mean the warden's discipline, the law of his own charge, so that no gray man can lie to him about his rights, the reading of wards and seals in the hands of men so that he sees the trap before he stands in it, gobbledeggook so that he can hear us plan around him and be part of the planning. And above all, the one lesson that keeps a warden alive, that the stone cannot be commanded out of him, only given, and that therefore his safety is his own silence and his own will, and no torment in the world can take from him a thing he does not surrender. He looked at Vornak. He learned half of that himself before we had said a word. He asked who would take it before we told him anyone would. I have never seen the like, and I have read the estates of a great many clever dead men. Ragnarok was silent, drumming his fingers once and stopping. There is a cost to what you propose, the director said. If we teach him, we make him ours, and the ministry will call it abduction, and the old man Dumbledore will call it interference, and both of them will be, in the narrowest legal sense, correct. We would be a bank that took a wizard child under its wing, and no bank has done that since the treaty, and there are those on both sides who would use it to break the treaty. He turned to the case on the wall, to the compact glowing amber in its glass. And there is a cost to not teaching him, which is that we render a defenseless child to a field of hunters and call it respecting the wizard's law. He was quiet a moment more. The compact does not bind us to teach him. It binds us to guard the vigil and render the charter, and we have rendered it. Everything past that is not debt, it is choice. Then choose, said Gornuk softly, as our people chose 1,000 years ago when 4 humans came down into the dark and asked us to guard a door we would never open, for a family we would never meet, on nothing but their word that it mattered. We chose to keep faith with a promise larger than ourselves. The warden is 7 years old and lives in a cupboard and asked the right question before anyone taught it to him. I say we keep faith, I say we teach him. Ragnarok looked at the compact a while longer. Then he turned back to the room, and the decision was already in the set of him. Teach him, the director said, quietly and quickly and well. Vornak will have the ordering of it, since the warden trusts him and trust cannot be conjured. And send word tonight to every guard on the old deep. The door has a warden now, and the wolves have caught the scent. And from this hour no one goes down that passage who is not of our blood and cleared by my own hand. If they come for him, and they will come, let them learn what it costs to hunt on ground the goblins hold. He sat. Now bring him home before the muggles decide he has run away and make a noise we cannot afford. Gently, Vornak, he has had the longest day of his short life, and it is not the longest he will have. Give him this evening whole. They took Harry home at dusk by the same folded corner and set him down on the gray pavement of Privet Drive as the streetlights were coming on, and Vornak walked him to the gate and no further. You will hear from us within the week, the old goblin said. There is much to arrange and much you must learn, and some of it must be learned quickly, because the world has begun to move and it will not wait for you to grow up. Say nothing to the people in that house that you do not have to. Trust no adult who is kind to you too suddenly or too well, and I include in that warning kind adults who mean you no harm, because the ones who mean you harm will wear the same face. He looked up at the ugly, ordinary, unremarkable house. You did well today, warden. You did better than well. You did the thing that is hardest of all, which is to hear that your whole life has been a hidden shape you never suspected, and not to lose your head over it, and to keep asking the useful question, which is who will try to take it. Keep asking it, and keep this. He held out on his open palm a coin. It was not gold. It was a flat disc of the same dull dark metal as the warden's seal, and cut into it was an open hand with a star above it, and it was warm. If you need us and cannot reach us, close your hand on this and think of the door at the bottom of the blue passage, Vornak said. We will feel it the way we felt you wake. It is the only one of its kind, and it is 1,000 years old, and it was made for the warden to call the guard, and no warden has held it since before your histories began. It is yours. Do not lose it, and do not show it, and do not use it unless the need is real, because when you call, we come, all of us, and we come armed, and we do not come quietly. Harry closed his hand around the warm coin. It settled into his palm as though it had always meant to be there, and the warmth of it ran up his arm to meet the warmth under his ribs, and the two of them recognized each other, and something in him eased. Thank you, he said. It was a small thing to say, and it was the truest thing he had said all day, and Vornak, who did not soften things, heard exactly how much was folded into it, and inclined his head the bare degree that was the whole of a goblin's tenderness. Go in, Vornak said. Eat if they let you, and if they do not, there is bread in your cupboard now that was not there this morning, and there will be more, and no one will ever be able to tell you why. Sleep, dream of your door if it comes. And when the kind stranger finds you, as he will, remember that you asked the right question first, before anyone had to teach it to you. He turned to go and then turned back once in the dusk. You asked who would try to take it. The answer, warden, is that they already are. 2 of them tonight in 2 warm rooms are making their plans. You cannot stop that, but you can be ready, and being ready begins with knowing it is true. Good night. And he was gone, folded away between one streetlight and the next, and Harry Potter stood alone at the gate of number 4 with 1,000-year-old coin warm in his fist, and he did not go in at once. He stood and looked up at the darkening summer sky, at the first hard points of the stars coming out over the pebble-dash roofs of Privet Drive, and he thought about a star that had fallen 1,000 years ago into a northern moor, and been carried home in 2 hands, and made into a shelter, and hidden in a family, and hidden in him. And he found standing there that the thing he had spent 7 years believing about himself, that he was no one, that he was a chore and a shame and a resemblance to a dead woman, had quietly come apart in his hands over the course of a single day, and would not go back together, and he was glad, and he let himself just this once, alone in the dark where no one could see and use it against him, be glad. And he closed his fist tighter around the coin and went in to see what the world would do next. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. The warden's discipline. The lessons began on a Tuesday, and they began, as Vornak did everything, with a correction. You are going to want to think of this as school, the old goblin said. They were in a small stone room off the record chamber that the goblins had given over to the purpose, furnished with a slate table, 2 stools, and a single high lamp that burned without smoke. It is not school. School teaches you what is known. I am going to teach you what is true, which is a smaller and more dangerous body of knowledge, and I am going to teach it to you at a pace that would break most grown men because you do not have the years that most grown men are given. Do you understand the difference? School is for people who have time, Harry said. This is for people who don't. Yes, Vornak set a flat gray stone on the table between them. First lesson. This is a ward stone, the simplest kind, the sort a shopkeeper sets under his threshold to know when the door is opened after hours. It is doing something right now. Tell me what. Harry looked at it. It was a rock. He was 7, and he had spent 7 years learning that the way to survive a test was to notice the thing the tester expected you to miss, and so he did not look at the stone. He looked at the table around it, and then at the lamp, and then at the fine dust on the slate, and he saw that the dust lay evenly everywhere except in a faint ring around the stone, a hand's breadth out, where the gray powder had been pushed very slightly back, as though the air there were not quite still. It's breathing, Harry said. There's a ring around it where the dust's been pushed away. So it's putting something out a little all the time, like a fire puts out heat, except you can't feel this, you can only see where it moves the dust. Whatever it does when the door opens, it's already doing a quiet version of it now all the time just to stay awake. He looked up. Magic that works costs something to run, it shows. You told me that. Warmth is work. This is the same, only it's not warmth, it's, I don't know, pressure. Vornak was quiet for a moment. Then he took the wardstone off the table and put it back in his case and took out another and set it down. That one is dead, he said. Spent 100 years ago, empty as a dry well. Tell me how you know without touching it, and you will have learned in one morning a thing the guild does not trust an apprentice to learn in a year. Harry looked at the dust. There was no ring. It's not breathing, he said. The dust's even all the way in. It's not doing anything. It's just a rock that used to be something. Yes, and Vornak, who did not praise because praise makes an apprentice work for the praise instead of the truth, said nothing at all, which Harry was learning to read as the highest mark the old goblin gave. That was the shape of the lessons. Vornak taught him to read wards by their leavings, the ring in the dust, the note a sealed door gives off when you knock on the frame beside it, the smell of a curse gone stale. Ripknot taught him knots, the literal kind first, rope over rope, and then the kind that were not rope at all but the way a ward was tied off, where its weak point had to be, because everything that is tied has an end, and the end is where you begin. Agner, who could not see, taught him to close his eyes and read a seal with his fingers, the hammer marks in old iron, the difference between wax poured warm and wax pressed cold, the particular deadness of a forgery, which the old keeper said had a texture like a smile with nothing behind it. And in the evenings, when the day's work was done and Harry should by rights have been asleep, Gornuk taught him gobbledeggook, not the tourists' phrases but the law tongue, the exact and unforgiving grammar of a people who had learned across 10,000 years that a contract is only as strong as the least generous reading of its worst chosen word. It was Agner who gave him the lesson he did not forget. On the 6th evening, the blind keeper set the open charter before him in its casket, and guided the child's fingers to the 4 dark seals along its lower margin, and told him to close his eyes and be silent and simply feel. The founders are gone, Agner said low, but a seal is a hand pressed into the world, and a hand leaves more than its shape. Feel Godric's there, the lion. He pressed it too hard. You can feel where the wax squeezed out under the edge. He did everything too hard. Fire does. Now Rowan is the eagle. Feel how clean, not a hair of overflow. She pressed exactly as hard as the work required and not 1 grain harder because waste was, to her, a kind of lie. Now Helga's the badger, warm still, always warm, a hearth seal. She is the reason the whole charter has kept 1,000 years without crumbling, for she gave it keeping. And Salazar's, the serpent at the end, pressed last and pressed cold, deliberate, the wax let go hard before he said it, so that the mark would be sharp and would last, because he thought in centuries and did not trust the warm and easy thing to endure. Harry sat with his eyes closed and his fingertips on 1,000 years of dead hands, and under the pads of his fingers he felt them. 4 people who had built the whole of the world he had just been let into, 4 different ways of pressing a mark into wax that were really 4 different ways of being alive. And something went through him that had no name he had been taught, a largeness, a sense of standing at the foot of something so tall he could not see the top of it. And he did not open his eyes for a long time, and none of the goblins made him. They were real, he said at last quietly. I knew they were real, but I didn't feel it until now. They were people. They pressed too hard, or they didn't waste anything, or they thought in centuries. And one of these 4, looked at a family 1,000 years ago and decided to trust it with everything, and that family turned into me. He opened his eyes. That's a lot to have your fingers on. Yes, said Agner, and closed the casket gently, and did not say, because a keeper does not say such things, that in 60 years of guarding seals he had never once heard a person, human or goblin, understand in a single evening what the child had understood, which was that the old magic was not a power to be used but a trust to be kept, and that the difference between the two was the whole of why the founders had chosen a family and not a king. Harry learned faster than any of them had words for. He did not learn the way a clever child learns, gulping facts and forgetting them. He learned the way water learns the shape of a valley, filling every low place, finding every crack, and once a thing was in him it did not leave, and he could take it out weeks later and turn it and see how it fit against something new. By the end of the second week, he was reading Wardstone's Ripknot set out to fool him and finding the false one every time. By the end of the third, he could hold a broken conversation in the law tongue, and Gornuk had stopped smiling the almost smile and started, once or twice, genuinely arguing with him, which the law speaker did with no one. And the goblins, who did not soften, softened. It happened without any of them deciding it. Ripknot began saving the hardest ward puzzles to do together, because it was more fun that way. Agner, who spoke to almost no one, took to keeping Harry an hour past the lesson to tell him things that were not lessons, old stories of the founding time, the sound of Rowan's voice, which the deep records claimed to remember, low and quick and never wasting a word. And Vornak, who had guarded a door for 91 years and expected to die guarding it, found that he had begun to arrange his days around a thin green-eyed child, and did not examine the fact too closely, because a cursebreaker learns not to probe the one beam holding up the ceiling. "You are happy here," Vornak said to him once at the end of a long day, and it was not a question, and it was as close to tenderness as he came. "I'm useful here," Harry said, which was a 7-year-old's word for the same thing, and did not know that it broke the old goblin's heart a little, because a child should not have to be useful to be kept. The ministry's paper arrived on the 9th day, and Gornuk let Harry watch him refuse it, because a lesson in the law was worth more delivered live than described. It came by a junior clerk from the Department of Magical Heritage, a nervous young man who had clearly been told nothing about what he carried, and it was addressed, with a functionary's exactness, to the keeper of the instrument of the founding age presently in the custody of Gringotts Bank. Gornuk received it in the marble hall, standing, and read it once through, and handed it to Harry without a word, and Harry read it too, slowly, the way Gornuk had taught him to read anything a man in a grey office had drafted, which was to read the worst chosen word first and see what it was hiding. "It's a requisition," Harry said. He found the clause number, under the Recovery of Founder Antiquities Act. "It says the instrument is of national significance and must be surrendered into the protective custody of the committee within 30 days, and that failure to comply is an offense." He looked up. "It doesn't name the Vigilstone. It can't, because they don't know what it is. It just says the instrument. They're trying to take a thing they can't describe from a keeper they won't name on the strength of a law that sounds important." "And what is wrong with it?" Gornuk asked, legally. "In one sentence, Warden." "A law speaker who needs 2 sentences has already lost," Harry thought. He had the answer because he had read the charter, and the charter had a clause for exactly this, and Gornuk had made him learn it by its name. "The clause of no sovereign," he said. "The vigil can't be owned or held in trust by any crown, council, ministry, or coin. It can only be guarded by blood in the person of the warden, so the committee can pass whatever law it likes. The relic isn't a thing the nation can take, because it was made 1,000 years ago to be untakeable, and their act is younger than the charter, and the older right wins. The requisition isn't illegal, it's void. It's asking for a thing that legally cannot be given to it by anyone, including me." Gornuk turned to the nervous clerk and spoke in the flat, formal register of the law, and every goblin in the hall went still to hear a law speaker of Gringotts pronounce. "Return this to Aloysius Crane," Gornuk said, "with the compliments of the bank and this reply, which he will not like and cannot answer. The instrument to which the committee refers is bound under an instrument of the founding age that predates the committee, the act, the ministry, and the statute of secrecy itself, and which contains a clause of no sovereign. It cannot be surrendered into the custody of the nation because it cannot be held by the nation. It cannot be held in trust because it is already held by an older trust which the bank is sworn to keep. There is no failure to comply because there is nothing that could be complied with. Tell him the bank does not recognize the requisition, will not recognize it, and considers any attempt to enforce it a breach of the founding treaty between our peoples, which we will answer as breaches of that treaty have always been answered." He returned the paper. "You may tell him also that we know he did not draft this alone. The act has slept for 100 years. It did not wake by itself 9 days ago. Someone whispered to him. We would very much like to know who, and we will find out, and when we do, the bank has a long memory and a longer reach. Good day." The clerk fled. Harry watched him go and then looked up at the law speaker. "That won't stop them," Harry said. It was not a question. No. Void law does not stop a man who has decided the law is beneath him, any more than a locked door stops a man who has decided to come through the wall. It only tells you which way he will come next. Crane will not accept the void. He will try to make it real by force, or he will hand the problem to a man with fewer scruples than he has, and that man is already in the field, and you have already met him in a library and refused him your name. Gornuk folded the copy of the reply into his sleeve. "That is the whole of the law, Warden, when the stakes are high enough. It is a fence, and a fence keeps out only the people who agree to be kept out. For the rest, you need more than a fence. You need a door that will not open to force, and you have one. It is at the bottom of the blue passage. Remember that in the days coming. There is one place in all the world that cannot be taken by anyone but you, and the whole art of surviving this is to reach it before they reach you. The kind stranger found him, as Vornek had promised, on a gray afternoon in the third week, and he found him at the public library in Little Winging, because Aurelian Rook had done his reading, and knew that the warden of the vigil, when the muggles who kept him did not want him underfoot, went to the one place in that dreary town where a person could be no one in peace. Harry was in the reference section, where the older books were kept and no one checked, reading about the medieval guilds of goldsmiths, because Gornuk had said something about the goblin's first treaty, and Harry wanted the human side of it to set against the goblin side, when a shadow fell across his table and a voice said warmly, "Now there is a serious book for a serious young man." Harry looked up. The man was tall and spare and beautifully dressed in a way that did not belong in Little Winging, with silver hair swept back and hands he kept folded before him like a singer, and he was smiling, and the smile reached his eyes, which was the first thing Harry noticed, because in Harry's experience the smiles that reached the eyes were the ones you had to watch, since a smile that reaches the eyes has been practiced. "It's about guilds," Harry said neutrally, and watched. "Guilds, craft and secret and old loyalty." The man drew out the chair opposite without asking and sat and folded his beautiful hands on the table. "May I so rarely meet anyone in a town like this who reads anything at all, let alone the history of the trades. My name is Rook. I collect old things and I write about them, which is a dull way of saying I am a man with too much time and a weakness for the past." "And you are late," said Harry, and did not give his name, and saw the flicker. It was very small. A man less watched than Aurelian Rook had trained himself to be would not have shown it at all, but Harry had spent 7 years reading the faces of people who wanted things from him and did not want him to know it, and he saw the flicker, the half-instant where the warm, reaching smile had to be put back on because something under it had moved. The man had expected the name. He had wanted the name. He had come here for the name and for the child attached to it, and the not getting of it had cost him a flicker, and Harry, who was 7 and looked it, set the flicker beside the boiling times of kettles and the weak places in a 1,000-year-old thread, where he kept the things that would matter later. "Late," Rook repeated, and laughed, an easy, cultured laugh, recovering beautifully. "Of course, I won't keep you. It's only that you have rather an unusual look, you know, that scar in the eyes, and I thought, there's a boy whose family I might have known. I knew a great many old families in my time, the Potters, for instance." He said it lightly, watching, and Harry gave him nothing, absolutely nothing, kept his face at the exact gray blankness he had perfected against Aunt Petunia, and had the satisfaction of watching a very clever man learn that the child across the table was not going to be easy. "A wonderful old family," Rook went on smoothly. "Guardians of a great many things, the Potters in their day. It would be a shame, don't you think, for a boy of such a family to grow up not knowing what he came from, not knowing his own inheritance. There are people who could help with that, who could teach him what he is. I am one of them." "There's a man teaching me already," Harry said, before he had decided whether to say it, and then decided the small truth was worth what it bought, which was the second flicker, larger than the first. "He says the ones who mean me harm will wear the same face as the ones who don't. He says I should trust no adult who is kind to me too suddenly or too well." He gathered his book and stood unhurried, because he had learned that you never run from a thing, since running only tells it that it was right to come for you. "You've been very kind, very suddenly, and very well. Goodbye, Mr. Rook." He walked out of the library into the gray afternoon with his heart going hard and steady and his face perfectly still, and he did not look back, and behind him Aurelian Rook sat alone at the reference table with his beautiful hands folded and his warm smile gone, and looked at the space where the child had been, and understood that he had made his first mistake in 40 years, which was to underestimate the size of the mind in the small body, and began methodically, calmly, to plan around it. "Silas," he said that evening to the broad, soft man who did not sit, "the direct approach is closed. The child is guarded, and worse, the child is clever, clever than any 7-year-old has a right to be, and he has been warned about men exactly like me by someone who knows exactly what I am." He aligned the papers on his desk until they lay square. "So we will not persuade him. Persuasion requires a fool, and he is not one. We will take the other road. Find me the door, Silas. Find me the thing the goblins guard. If we cannot bring the key to the lock as a friend, we will bring the lock to the key by force at a time and place of our choosing, and the child's cleverness will not save him, because cleverness is no defense against being simply suddenly taken." He looked up quietly. "We have time. He is 7. He is not going anywhere. His keepers do not carry him. Patience, Silas, patience is the whole of the art." Albus Dumbledore came to Gringotts on the last day of the third week, and he came openly, up the white steps and through the bronze doors in robes of deep plum, and he asked courteously to see the director, and he was made to wait, which no one had made Albus Dumbledore do in a very long time, and he waited without complaint, because he understood that being made to wait was itself the goblin's first sentence in a conversation they intended to win. He was shown up at last to the high round chamber, and Ragnar did not rise, and Dumbledore noted that too, and folded his long hands into his sleeves and inclined his head with the particular warmth he used on people he was about to disagree with. "Director, thank you for seeing me. I find myself in the unusual position of not entirely understanding something that has happened in my own charge, and it is a position I dislike, so I have come to the source." He smiled. "A writ of blood reading was served on a house in Surrey 3 weeks ago on a child I have taken some pains to keep quiet and safe. I should very much like to know why." "You know the law," said Ragnar. "The bank may read the blood of an heir it holds in trust. We read it. The writ was lawful. You have seen it, or you would not be here." "I have seen it. It is entirely lawful and entirely opaque, which is a combination I have learned over a long life to treat with respect." Dumbledore's blue eyes were mild and did not leave the director's face. "The child is 7 years old. He has no fortune worth a reading of that authority, no debts, no disputed estate. And yet the bank spent a right it has not spent in living memory to bring him here, and has, I am given to understand, kept him here most days for 3 weeks, teaching him things. I am his magical guardian director in all but the parchment. I placed him where he is. I watch over him. And I did not know until my own watchers told me that the goblins of Gringotts had taken an interest in Harry Potter. The mildness did not change, and that was its threat. So I will ask plainly, as one keeper of dangerous secrets to another, what has he woken?" Ragnar looked at the old wizard for a long moment. The founding compact glowed amber in its case on the wall between them. "You placed a child in a cupboard," the director said, "and called it keeping him safe." Something moved behind the blue eyes, quick and gone. "I placed him behind the strongest protection I could devise, at a cost I do not expect you to understand and will not explain. The cupboard is a cruelty, and I know it, and I have wept over it, and I left him there anyway because the alternative was worse, and a guardian who will not choose the lesser cruelty is no guardian at all. Do not lecture me on the child's suffering, director. I have counted every hour of it, and I will answer for every hour of it, and none of that is your affair. What is my affair is that something has waked in him, and the goblins know what it is, and I do not, and a thing that powerful, unknown, and unguarded is precisely the sort of thing that gets a child killed." He leaned forward the smallest degree. "I am not your enemy in this. I'm very possibly the only friend that child has who can stand between him and the ministry, which will want whatever he has woken, and worse men who will want it more. Tell me what it is, and let me help you guard it." "No," said Ragnar. The word sat in the room. "The compact binds us," the director went on unhurried, "to guard the thing the child has woken, and to render its charter to him, and to keep the whole of it secret from every power on the earth that is not the warden himself. Every power, Chief Warlock. There is no clause for the kindly meant. There is no exception for the powerful friend. The founders who wrote it had known a great many powerful friends, and had learned what such friendships cost, and they wrote us a compact with no room in it for men exactly like you, who mean well and are wise and are certain, and who would take the thing into their own keeping for the child's own good and never give it back, because giving it back would be, they would always find, just slightly too dangerous." He sat back. "You want to know what he woke? I will tell you the only thing I am permitted to tell you, which is this: it is his. Not the ministry's, not the bank's, not yours. His by a right 1,000 years older than your office and stronger than your protection, and the best thing you can do for the child you left in the cupboard is to go on standing between him and the ministry, exactly as you offered, and ask us nothing further, and trust that the oldest bank in Britain knows how to guard what it has sworn to guard." Dumbledore was silent a long moment. When he spoke again, the courtesy was still there, but under it, plain now, was the weight of the man the whole of magical Britain stepped carefully around. "He is a child," Dumbledore said. "Whatever he has woken, he is 7 years old, and he cannot defend it, and you are painting a target on his back by keeping him near it. I have spent 6 years making him invisible. You are making him a warden of something men will kill for. I hope, director, for his sake, that the goblins are as good at guarding boys as they are at guarding gold, because if they are not, the difference will be measured in the only currency that matters, and it will not be yours that is spent." "We are aware," said Ragnar, "of the stakes. We have been aware of them for 1,000 years, which is somewhat longer than you. Good day, Chief Warlock. You may see the child if he wishes to see you. We do not keep him. He is not our prisoner. He is the one free person in this entire affair, and I would ask you to remember, when you speak to him, that he has spent his whole life being decided for by adults who knew best, and that he is done with it, and that he will know the moment you begin whether you have come to help him or to manage him. He is uncannily good at knowing. You will find that out. Harry did see him, because Harry wanted to take the measure of the man who had left him in the cupboard." They met in the small stone lesson room, with Vornak standing against the wall, unmoving, a witness the goblins would not withdraw. Dumbledore lowered himself onto Ripnot's stool, which was too small for him, and did not seem to mind, and looked at the thin child across the slate table with an attention that Harry recognized, because it was the same total attention Harry himself paid to things, and it told him that whatever else this old man was, he was not a fool, and was not to be played with as Rook had been played with. "Hello, Harry," Dumbledore said. "I am Albus Dumbledore. I knew your mother and father. I am, in a way that no one ever explained to you, the person who decided where you would live, and I have come in part to say that I am sorry for the shape of that decision, and that I made it for reasons, and that reasons are not the same as being right." Harry looked at him for a while. "You knew about all of this," Harry said at last, "the whole time, that there was magic, and that I was part of it, and that I wasn't ordinary. You knew, and you left me with people who told me every day that I was nothing, and you let them on purpose for reasons." He was not accusing, he was verifying. "That's what you just said." "Yes," said Dumbledore, and did not look away and did not soften it, and Harry gave him a private mark for that, as he had given Vornak one on the first day. "It is exactly what I said. I will not tell you it was kind, because it was not. I will tell you it kept you alive, and that I believed and still believe it was the least terrible of the roads open to me, and that I have never once been at peace with it. You may hold it against me, you would be within your rights." "I don't hate you," Harry said, and it was true, and it surprised the old man, and Harry saw it surprise him. "Hating people is expensive. I worked that out early. You spend all this time hating someone and they don't even notice, so it's just money out of your own pocket." He folded his hands on the table unconsciously, the way Gornuk did. "But I don't trust you, those aren't the same thing. Vornak told me not to trust any adult who's kind to me too suddenly, and you're not being kind, you're being honest, which is rarer and I like it better, but you still want something. Everyone who comes to see me now wants something. The man in the library wanted my name. The gray man at the ministry wants my inheritance for the nation. What do you want?" Dumbledore was quiet for a moment, and then he laughed softly, and the sound of it was unrehearsed, which from this man meant a great deal. "What do I want? Do you know, I am not certain anyone has asked me that so directly in 50 years. He considered it and gave the child the honest answer, because he had understood in the space of 3 sentences that nothing else would work on this one. "I want you to be safe." That is the true thing, and it is also, I am aware, exactly what a man would say who wanted to take the dangerous object away from you for your own good. So I will not ask you what you have woken, because the goblins have made it plain I have no right to it, and I find, sitting here, that I agree with them. I will ask you one thing only, and then I will go, and you may call on me or not, as you choose. He leaned forward. "If it ever comes to the point where the thing you guard, or the people who want it, are more than the goblins can hold, will you let me stand between you and them? Not take it, not manage you, only stand there in the doorway on your side. Will you at least keep that door open?" Harry looked at him and weighed him seal blind, the way Agner had taught him, feeling for the hammer marks under the surface, the deadness of a forgery, the smile with nothing behind it. He did not find the deadness. He found something more complicated, an old and tired and enormously powerful man who had done a cruel thing for a reason and could not forgive himself for it and would very likely do it again, and who meant, right now in this room, exactly what he said. "I'll keep the door open," Harry said. "That's all I'll promise, but I keep my promises, so it's worth having." "It is worth a great deal," said Dumbledore, and rose and inclined his head to the child, and then, to Vornak's visible surprise, to Vornak. "Guard him well, curse breaker. He is worth more than the thing he carries, and I suspect you already know it, which is the only reason I am walking out of this bank with my mind at something like ease." And he went, plum robes and all, up out of the deep and into the ordinary daylight, and left behind him a 7-year-old who had just held his own across a table from the most formidable wizard alive, and had not once given anything away, and had, in the giving of nothing, given Dumbledore the only thing that could reassure him, which was proof that the child could not be easily taken. It was 3 nights later that Silas Vane came for the charter, and the only reason it failed was that Harry had asked, on his first day of lessons, the right question. Vane did not come as himself. He came in the skin of a records clerk, with papers that were nearly perfect, on an evening when the marble hall was thinning toward closing, and he went down, quiet and unhurried, toward the deep record room, because Rook had reasoned that if they could not yet take the child, they could take the charter, and a charter in Rook's hands was a 1,000-year-old document he could study at leisure for the one flaw, the one clause. The one forgotten word that might let a man of sufficient patience command a stone that answered only to blood. He was very good. He had been the best of his generation before the guild struck him off, and the skills did not leave when the license did. He passed 3 wards that would have caught anyone else. The first he read by its leavings and stepped around, the way a poacher steps around a snare he can see in the grass. The second he unpicked at its tie-off, patient, 1 strand at a time, and left it hanging so limp that a passing guard would think it merely tired. The third was a goblin ward of the middle sort, the kind that does not try to stop an intruder but only to remember him, to take the print of his magic and hold it for the reckoning afterward, and Vane knew that trick too, and fed it a false print, a borrowed signature off a dead man's wand, so that if the ward were ever read it would swear that the intruder had been a curse-breaker 10 years in his grave. He was 4 doors from the record room when he passed the 4th ward, and the 4th ward was new, and the 4th ward was the one Harry had helped Ripknot tie the week before as a lesson, and it was tied off in a way no adult curse-breaker would think to look for. because it was tied the way a child ties a knot he has just been taught, with an extra loop that does nothing, that is pure redundancy, that a professional would strip away as inefficient, and a professional would therefore never expect to be load-bearing. Vane stripped the extra loop because it was inefficient, and the extra loop was the whole of it, and the ward did not sound an alarm because alarms can be silenced. It simply quietly told one thing: the 1,000-year-old coin in a thin child's pocket, 4 streets and 1 folded corner away in the dark of a cupboard, went warm. Harry woke with his hand already closing on it. He did exactly what he had been told. He did not investigate. He did not go anywhere. He closed his fist on the warm coin and thought, with all the focus in his considerable mind, of the door at the bottom of the blue passage. And a mile beneath London the guard on the Old Deep felt the warden call, and the record room filled, in the space of 90 seconds, with more armed goblins than Silas Vane had ever seen in one place. And Silas Vane, who was very good, was good enough to know when a job had become a grave, and was gone before they reached the door, back up through his own careful route, leaving nothing behind but a stripped ward and the knowledge, carried back to warm study, that the child had defended a vault 4 streets away in his sleep with a knot and a coin, and the one question a curse-breaker learns first and a hunted person learns fastest: where's the weak place, and how do I make it strong before someone finds it for me? He tied a false loop into a live ward, Vornak said, in the high chamber before dawn, with something in the flat old voice that was not quite steady. Because I told him on the first day that everything with an end has a weak point at the end, and he decided the way to protect the weak point was to build a false one for the enemy to find. A grown curse-breaker would have stripped it. A child built it precisely because a grown curse-breaker would strip it. Director, he stopped. He is 7, and he has just outthought the best struck-off breaker in Britain in his sleep from 4 miles away. I no longer doubt that we can teach him fast enough. The trouble is something else now. Say it, said Ragnarok. The trouble is that we will teach him, and it will not be enough because the enemy has stopped trying to be clever, Vornak said. Rook sent Vane to be clever, and Vane failed, and a patient man does not send cleverness twice. The next thing he sends will not be a trick. It will be a hand on the child's shoulder in a crowd, in a folded corner, in a room the child cannot get out of, and then it will not matter how clever the child is, because you cannot outthink being simply physically taken. We have to move first. We have to take him to the door and let him claim what is his, while the taking is still ours to arrange and not theirs. He looked at the director. The door has waited 1,000 years. We have run out of the luxury of letting it. Ragnarok was silent for a while, and when he answered, it was not to argue. There is a difficulty you have not named, the director said. The door tests. Blood is not enough. The records are plain on it, and Karok died old and certain of it. We do not know what the test is, or how a warden fails it, or what failing costs. We would be setting a 7-year-old before a thing that has turned away every soul who approached it for 1,000 years, and doing it not when he is ready, but when the wolves force our hand. He looked at Vornak. If the door refuses him, we will have shown the whole hungry world where the prize is, and taught them the child cannot open it under pressure. And if we wait, they take him in a crowd, and it ends the same, only worse. He set his hands flat. There is no safe move left on this board. There is only the least unsafe one. So tell me, Cursebreaker, since you have known this child longer and better than any of us, is he ready? Not old enough, not trained enough, ready, in the part of him the door will actually read. Vornak thought about it for a long moment because it was the only question that mattered, and he would not answer it lightly. I do not know what the door reads, he said at last, but I know what it was made to keep out, because the founders told us in the very shape of the thing. It was made to keep out the greedy and the cruel and the ones who would use a shelter as a weapon. And I have watched this child for 3 weeks, and in 3 weeks I have not once seen him reach for a thing that was not his, or take pleasure in another's smallness, or ask what the vigil could do to his enemies, rather than what it could do for the people he cares about. He is 7, and he is the least greedy soul I have ever guarded, and if the door reads hearts, director, then I would put his against any heart living. He stopped. Whether that is enough, no goblin can say, because no goblin has ever passed the blood. But if it is not enough, then the door was never meant to open for anyone, and the founders built a 1,000-year lie, and I do not believe that. I believe they built it for exactly this. For a child with nothing, who was given everything, and did not once ask to keep it for himself. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. The door that never opened. They went down to the Old Deep on the morning of the 9th day since the seal woke, and they went in force. Harry had never seen so many goblins in one place, and he understood, watching them assemble in the torchlight at the head of the blue passage, that he was not seeing a guard so much as a decision made visible. Ragnarok himself had come down, which the goblins said he had not done in 30 years. Gornuk walked at the front with a rolled copy of the charter under his arm, in case the law had to be spoken to the stone. Agner was carried down in a chair by 2 younger goblins, because the keeper of seals would not miss this if it cost him the last of his strength, and it very nearly would. And around Harry close moved a ring of curse-breakers with Vornak at their head and Ripknot at his shoulder, and every one of them carried the blued rods that were not steel and wore the flat, ready quiet of people who have decided that today is a day something might be spent. "You are certain," Ragnar said to Harry once at the head of the passage. "Not are you ready, are you certain?" It was, Harry had come to understand, the only question the goblins thought worth asking, because readiness was a thing the world decided for you and certainty was a thing you decided for yourself. "I dreamed my way here before I knew this place was real," Harry said. "I've been coming down this passage in my sleep since before I knew I had a name worth the trouble. I'm certain. I've been certain longer than any of you." Ragnar looked at him a moment, and then he did a thing no one present had ever seen the director of Gringotts do. He stepped aside and swept one long-fingered hand toward the dark mouth of the passage, and bowed, not the bare degree of courtesy but a full bow from the waist, the bow a subject gives a sovereign whose right is older than the throne. "Then lead, warden," said Ragnar. "It is your road, we have only kept it for you. Lead and we will follow, and today, for the first time in 1,000 years, the guard of the old deep walks behind the one it guards." Harry went down into the blue. The passage was exactly as it had been in the dream, and exactly as it had been the day Vornak let him look, and yet it was neither, because in the dream he had drifted, and on the day of looking he had stood at the top, and now he walked it, step by step on his own 2 feet, down and down into the deep blue rock where the moons waxed and waned along the walls and the air went still and cold and clean and old. The torchlight of the goblins behind him threw his shadow long down the slope, a small shadow at the head of a great many tall ones, and the deeper he went the quieter it all became, until the only sounds were the scuff of his own shoes, and beneath everything, so low he felt it in his chest before he heard it in his ears, the hum. It had been in his blood for 9 days, now it was in the stone. The whole of the old deep was humming, very faintly, the note of a bell struck 1,000 years ago and never allowed to fully fade, and as Harry descended the note grew, not louder but nearer, gathering itself, turning toward him, and he understood that the thing at the bottom of the passage had felt him start down and had begun, in whatever way a made thing can, to answer. He thought as he walked about how strange it was that he was not more shaken, and he examined the strangeness, because examining things was what he did instead of coming apart. 3 months ago he had been a child who flinched at the sound of Uncle Vernon's car in the drive. Now he was walking down into the oldest dark in Britain to lay his hand on a fallen star, and his hands were steady, and he thought the reason was simple and true and worth remembering. That dread was mostly about not knowing, and he had spent his whole life not knowing why he was hated, not knowing what he was, not knowing whether the strange things that happened around him made him a monster or a mistake. And now he knew. He was the warden. Something had been waiting for him, and it was good, and it was his to keep. A person who knows what they are, he thought, going down through the blue, is very hard to move, and he wondered why no one had ever told him that, and then he understood that no one had ever told him that because no one had ever wanted him to know what he was, and that the goblins were the first, and that this, in the end, was the whole difference between the people who had kept him and the people who had found him. The Dursleys had needed him small, because a small thing is easy to keep in a cupboard. The goblins had needed him large, because a large thing is what you send down into the dark to keep a promise. And a child, it turned out, will grow to the size that the people around him make room for, and for 7 years there had been room for nothing, and now there was room for a warden, and he was filling it as fast as it opened, the way water fills whatever you pour it into. And then the passage ended, and there was the door. It was smaller than he had built it in the dream, and larger in every way that mattered. A single slab of pale gray stone, seamless, set flush into the blue rock without hinge or handle or lock, and across its face, cut so fine that the torchlight found it only at the edges, an open hand held palm upward with a single star above it. It was the mark from his envelope and the mark from his charter and the mark, he now knew, that was written somewhere on his own blood where no eye could read it. It was the oldest thing he had ever stood before. It had turned away kings and the finest curse-breaker of 4 centuries and every hungry hand that had ever come this far, and it had done so not with violence but with a silence so complete that men had gone away certain they had imagined the whole idea of a door. Harry stood before it, small in the blue dark, and the door, for the first time in 1,000 years, noticed someone. He felt it happen. The hum, which had been everywhere, drew in all at once and focused, the whole vast patient attention of the thing narrowing to a point the size of a child, and the fine hairs rose along his arms, and the warmth under his ribs rose up to meet it, and the two of them, the small warmth he had carried for 9 days and the great warmth that had waited 1,000 years, reached across the last of the distance between them and touched. "Hello," Harry said quietly to the door. He did not feel foolish saying it. And the only polite thing to do, when a thing that old had finally decided to look at you. "I'm sorry I'm late, I came as soon as I knew." Behind him, the guard of the old deep had gone utterly still, because they had felt it too, the turning of the door's attention, and there was not one of them, from the director to the youngest curse-breaker, who did not understand that they were witnessing the single thing their nation had been keeping faith with for 1,000 years and had half stopped believing would ever come. Ripknot, who had been at the door 100 times and read nothing off it but cold, stood now with his palm half lifted toward the pale stone and could not make himself lower it. because for the first time in the history of the guard the door was awake and it was not looking at him. It was not looking at any of them. It had waited 1,000 years and turned aside 1,000 years of the finest curse-breakers in Britain, and it was looking with the whole of its ancient patient attention at a thin child in outgrown clothes who had just apologized to it for being late. Vornak set one hand on his apprentice's shoulder, not to lower the raised palm but to steady them both, and neither of them said a word, because there are moments a curse-breaker learns to stand inside without narrating, and this was the largest of his life. "Blood first," said Vornak low at his shoulder. "The founders keyed the outer stone to blood because blood is how you find a person. Agner has the needle. You know the shape of it, one drop on the star as you gave it to the seal. Then step back and do not touch the stone with your hands, whatever it does, until it has finished doing it. Do you understand? One drop on the star, don't touch it till it's done." Harry took the dark thorn of a needle from Agner's open palm, and the old keeper's clouded eyes were turned toward the door with an expression that had waited 60 years to wear. Harry pricked the side of his thumb cleanly without fuss, and a bead of red welled up, and he reached up on his toes and pressed it to the star above the open hand. For a moment nothing happened, and the silence of 1,000 years pressed in, and Harry had time to think, with the cold clear part of his mind that never fully stopped, that perhaps Vornak had been wrong, that perhaps the door was never meant to open for anyone, that perhaps he was about to be nothing but a child bleeding on a rock in front of the entire assembled dignity of Gringotts, proof that the whole thing had been a mistake after all. Then the star drank. The drop of red sank into the pale stone as it had sunk into the iron seal, and the stone took it, and along every hairline of the carved hand a light woke, thin and rose gold, running out from the star into the fingers and down into the palm and out to the very edges of the graven mark, and the whole hand glowed as though a fire had been lit inside the stone and shone through the thinnest places. The hum swelled. And the pale slab, which had no hinge and no handle and no lock, which had declined for 1,000 years to be a door at all, remembered that it was one and moved. It did not swing. It withdrew, sliding back into the blue rock and then aside, smooth and slow and utterly silent, a slab of stone as tall as a goblin and thicker than a man's arm, and it moved without weight, until where the door had been there was a low dark opening. And out of the opening breathed air that no living thing had tasted in 1,000 years, cold and dry and faintly sweet, the air of a shut room that had been waiting, patiently, to be opened by exactly one hand. Behind Harry the entire assembled guard of the old deep drew breath as one, and let it out slow, and Agner in his carried chair made a sound that was not a word and was the truest thing said by anyone that day. 1,000 years, Ragnak said, very quietly, and did not finish, because there was no end to the sentence that would have been large enough. Harry looked into the dark opening. Beyond it he could see the first few feet of a passage, low and close, cut in the same pale gray stone as the door, and then the dark took it. The warmth under his ribs leaned toward it, all of it, straining like a dog at the end of a lead. "Only the warden goes in," he said. It was not a question. He knew it as he had known his own name was Warden. "You can't follow me, any of you." "No," said Vornak, and the single syllable cost him something. "The outer door reads blood, and only your blood opened it, and it will admit only what your blood answers for. If any goblin sets foot past that threshold, the records say the door judges the warden to have brought a thief and closes and does not open again in that warden's life. We have kept this door for 1,000 years, and we cannot cross it. You go in alone, or you do not go in." His iron-colored eyes held Harry's. "This is the part I cannot teach you and cannot protect you from and have dreaded since the seal first warmed. Whatever is in there was made to test the warden, and it will test you alone, and we will stand here at the threshold and be able to do nothing but wait. So I will tell you the one thing I know, and then I will let you go. The door was made to keep out the greedy and the cruel and the ones who would take. You are none of those. Go in as yourself. Do not try to be what you think it wants. It has turned away 1,000 years of men trying to be what it wanted. Be the child who asked on the first day who would try to take it before anyone taught him to. That child it will know." Harry looked up at the old goblin who had bowed to him on a gray pavement and fed him first and taught him to read the weak places in the world, and there were a great many things he might have said, and he said the true one. "If I don't come back," he said, "thank you for all of it. You're the first people who ever wanted me for me and not for what I could carry. I'll try to come back, but if I don't, I wanted to have said it." And before any of them could answer, before the largeness of it could catch in anyone's throat, he turned and stepped through the threshold into the dark, and the small warmth and the great warmth closed the last distance and became at last one thing. The passage was short. It opened, after 20 feet, into a chamber. The chamber was round and domed and empty, cut whole from a single vein of the pale gray stone, and it should have been black as the inside of a fist, 1,000 years buried past the reach of any light, and it was not. It was lit. A cold silver light came from nowhere and everywhere, the light of stars seen from very high up with no air to soften them, and it fell on nothing, because the chamber was bare, floor and wall and dome, not a plinth, not a stone, not a mark, nothing at all except in the exact center of the floor a single line of writing, cut in the old tongue, glowing faintly the same rose gold as the hand on the door. Harry could read it. Not because he had learned the tongue, but because the chamber, like the charter, had decided to be understood by the one it was made for. The line said, "Take what you came for," and as he read it, the chamber changed. It did not fill with monsters or fire or any of the tests a child might have braced for. It filled with everything Harry had ever wanted, and it did so gently, and that was worse. The bare stone was gone, and he was standing in a room he had never seen and knew at once. A warm, bright room with a window full of green garden, and there were people in it. A man with untidy black hair and glasses and a laugh like a door thrown open, and a woman with red hair and his own green eyes, and they turned to him, and they knew him, and the woman held out her arms and said his name, his real name, the small, ordinary name Harry. In a voice he had never heard and recognized in every cell of his body, and the whole of the room was safe, safe as he had never once in 7 years been safe, safe forever. A place where no cupboard existed and no one had ever told him he was nothing, and the warm coin shape under his ribs had a whole family wrapped around it. And all he had to do was walk forward into his mother's arms, and it would be his, it would all be his. He only had to take what he came for. Harry stood at the edge of it with tears standing in his eyes and did not move. He was 7 years old and he had been hungry his whole life, and here was the whole of the feast, and every part of him that was a child strained toward it, and the part of him that had spent 7 years learning to tell a lie from a truth by its texture stood very still and did the coldest, hardest arithmetic of his life. "Not real," he said aloud to the beautiful room, and his voice shook and he let it shake, "because you did not lie about a thing this size even to yourself. They're dead, I know they're dead. Vornak told me, and the goblins don't lie, and I read it in the estate deposited 11 years ago by a man who died 6 years ago. My parents are dead, and this is a room made to look like them. And if I walk into it, I'll have taken what I came for, and the door said, 'Take what you came for,' and that's the trap. That's the whole trap." He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand once hard and kept looking at his mother's face, because he would not look away from it even to save himself, because it was the only time he would ever see it, and he was going to be brave enough to keep looking. "I didn't come for a family. I wanted one. I've wanted one every day of my life. But I didn't come here for one, and I know the difference, because someone taught me the difference between what you want and what you came for, and it was a blind old goblin, and he did it by mistake, and it's going to save my life." The beautiful room did not vanish. That was the cruelty of the test and the mercy of it. His mother's arms stayed open, and her green eyes stayed on him, full of a love he would never get to keep, and Harry looked at her for as long as he dared, and then he did the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the cupboard, harder than the years of being no one. He shook his head. "No," he said to his mother's face. "You're not for taking. Nothing that matters is for taking. That's the whole of it, isn't it? That's the answer to the whole thing." He was weeping now openly and standing perfectly still, and his voice came out clear. "I came here to guard it, not to take it. There's a stone somewhere behind you that 4 people made out of a fallen star to keep children safe, and it's a trust, not a treasure, and you can't take a trust, you can only keep it. So I'm not going to walk into the beautiful room. I'm going to stand here in the cold and ask, the way Vornak taught me, because asking is what you do when you don't own a thing." He lifted his chin. "Please, I don't want to take anything. I want to keep the promise my family made 1,000 years ago. Will you let me?" For a long moment the beautiful room held his mother's face, the green garden, the whole warm, impossible feast of it. Folded softly without violence, the way a held breath is let go, and his mother looked at him as it went, and her mouth moved, and though there was no sound Harry read it, because he could read lips, because he had taught himself everything, and what she said before she went was "Good boy." And the chamber was bare gray stone again, cold and domed and empty, and the line of writing on the floor was gone, and in the far wall, where there had been no opening, a second door stood open onto a golden light. The reliquary of the vigil was not large. It did not need to be. It held one thing, and the one thing was enough to fill any room in the world, however small, and would have filled a cathedral just as completely, because the size of it had nothing to do with the space it took up. Harry came through the golden light into a chamber walled in a stone that was not gray but the deep, star-flecked blue-black of the sky between the stars, and set into the very center of it, on a plinth of the same pale gray as the door, floating a hand's breadth above the plinth and turning, very slowly, was the vigil stone. It was smaller than his 2 fists together. It was a stone, as Agner had promised, and the word stone did nothing to it, because it was not any stone that had ever been quarried from the warm, familiar earth. It was a piece of the outside. It was black, and it was not black, for down in the black of it there were lights, small cold points of light scattered through the depth of it like stars seen through deep water, and they were not reflections, because there was nothing in that buried chamber for them to reflect. They were inside the stone. They had fallen out of the sky 1,000 years ago and never gone out, and when Harry moved his head the lights shifted, slow and vast, as though he were looking not at a stone the size of his 2 fists, but through a small dark window into the whole enormous cold burning deep of the night. It turned above its plinth without hurry, and as it turned it hummed, the note that had been in his blood for 9 days and in the whole of the old deep since he began his descent. And now this close, the note was not one note but a cord, 4 notes woven, and he knew without being told that they were four, that 4 hands had each set one strand of their own magic singing in the star's heart, and that the cord had been holding, patient and unbroken, for 1,000 years. Waiting for one small hand to come and complete it, he walked toward it. The cord swelled to meet him, and when he was close enough to reach out, though he did not yet reach, 4 things happened, or one thing happened 4 ways, and Harry stood in the presence of the founders. He did not see them. It was better and stranger than seeing. He felt them as he had felt them under his fingers in the wax of the 4 seals, only vast now and near, and turned toward him. He felt Godric, a heat, a great reckless warmth that pressed too hard and loved without measure, and the heat looked at the small scarred child and approved of his courage, of how he had wept and not run. He felt Rowena, clean and quick and cool, the mind that had shaped the test he had just passed, and she weighed him and found that he had answered her question not with cleverness but with honesty, which was the only answer she had ever accepted, and she found it sound. He felt Helga, warm and broad in keeping, the hearth that does not go out, and she looked at the child who had been given nothing and starved for love, and had refused to steal even a vision of it, and something in the great warm keeping of her gathered him in and would not let him go. And he felt Salazar, deep and cold and patient as still water, the one who thought in centuries, and the long cold patience of him looked down the 1,000 years he had planned for, and saw that it had come at last to this, to a child with no name in a cupboard who had turned out to be exactly, precisely to the last grain, the heart they had built the whole vast trust to find, and the still water of him did not so much as stir, which from Salazar was the whole of approval. Warden, said the founders, not in 4 voices and not in one, in the cord itself, in the note that was their 4 magic singing together. You came, you did not take, you asked, then keep what we made, keep it as we made it, for the keeping of what cannot keep itself. Lay your hand upon the star that fell, and be the watch that does not end. Harry reached out and laid his hand upon the Vigilstone. The world filled with light. It came up through his hand and his arm and his chest, and out through every part of him, the cold star fire of the outside dark, and it did not burn, though it should have. It warmed, the way the coin had warmed and the seal had warmed and the whole of the old deep had warmed. Only now the warmth was inside him, and he was inside the warmth, and there was no longer any line between the small warmth he had carried and the great one he had come to keep. He saw for one endless instant the whole of it, the star falling into the northern moor, and Rowena climbing to find it, and the 4 of them in the deep of a winter binding their magic into the black glass, and every hand that had carried the trust down the 1,000 years without knowing, the one pale life in the plague winter that had nearly ended it, his grandfather and his father and the mother whose face he had just refused to steal, all of them a single unbroken thread of keeping. Running down and down through the dark of time and coming out, warm and living, in the palm of a 7-year-old a mile beneath London. And he felt the vigil rise. It was only a little. He did not command it. He was not ready, and some part of him knew he was not ready and held. But the stone, with its warden's hand upon it at last after 1,000 years of the dark, lifted the smallest part of its power, and around Harry in that buried chamber a dome of cold gold light bloomed, thin as a soap bubble and stronger than the roots of the mountain above him. And for one instant he stood inside a shelter made of fallen starlight by 4 dead hands, and understood in his body and not just his clever head what it was he had been born to keep. Not a weapon, a roof. Held hand, a promise that inside this light, whatever Harry named as his own would be safe from every force the world could raise, because the founders had made it so and the founders did not fail. And in that instant, inside the thin gold shell of the risen vigil, Harry heard the cost of it, too, woven into the cord beneath the light. He heard that the shelter was not free, that a star does not fall out of the deep and become a roof for children without someone standing under it forever, holding it up. He heard the long line of the dead who had held it, most of them never knowing what the strange steadiness in their blood had been. The grandmother who had run into a burning house for a stranger's child and not known why she was unafraid. The great-uncle who had faced down a mob at a village gate with nothing but the flat certainty that he could not be moved. All of them wardens who never learned the word, all of them holding up the roof a little in the dark for 1,000 years. He understood that he was the first in 3 centuries to hold it knowing, and that knowing made it heavier and made it his, and that he would not put it down, because he had at last found the one thing in the whole of his small, starved life that could not be taken from him by anyone, which was a thing he had chosen to carry. The dome sank, the light drew back into the stone. The stone settled, warm and turning and full of stars, and it was his now, and he was its, and the cord had become 5 notes, 4 founders and a warden, and the watch that had waited 1,000 years was, at last, being kept again. Harry stood with his hand on the Vigilstone and tears drying on his face and the whole enormous weight and gift of it settling onto his small shoulders, and he was not afraid, and there was no swagger anywhere in him, and he was, for once, simply and entirely where he was supposed to be. "I'll keep it," he whispered to the stone, to the 4, to the thread of the dead who had carried it to him. "I promise I'll keep it as you made it, for the keeping of what can't keep itself." Outside, at the threshold, the guard of the old deep kept the hardest watch of their lives, which was the watch of doing nothing while everything happened out of reach. They could not follow. They had known it, and knowing had not made the standing easier. So they stood in their ring at the mouth of the open door, 100 goblins and a director and a law-speaker and a blind keeper carried down in a chair, and they waited, and there was nothing in the world for any of them to do but wait, and goblins are not by temper a waiting people. Ripnot stood closest to the dark, at Vornak's shoulder, and he had stopped pretending to be calm. "It's been too long," he said low. "Hasn't it? It's been too long." "It has been 11 minutes, said Vornak, who had been counting, because counting was the only discipline left to him. "It feels like a year because you love him, and love has no head for arithmetic. Stand. Whatever is happening in there, we cannot help it, and the worst thing we could do is give the door a reason to think we mean to interfere. Stand and count with me and be ready, because when he comes out he will have been through a thing no living soul has survived in 1,000 years, and he will need us steady, not frantic." So Ripnot stood and counted, and it was Agner in his carried chair who felt it first, because the Keeper of Seals had spent 60 years feeling what the eye could not see. Light, the old goblin breathed. "There is light coming out of the door," and there was. It began as the faintest gold at the mouth of the dark passage, and it grew, spilling out across the blue stone of the old deep, warm and cold at once, the color of a fire seen through a window on a winter road, and with it came the hum, swelling, 4 notes and then, impossibly, 5, and the whole assembled guard of Gringotts stood in the light that leaked from the reliquary and felt in their chests, in their old iron bones, the vigil wake. Ragnarok, who had not knelt to anything in 30 years, went down onto one knee in the gold light without seeming to know he had done it. Agner wept silently, his blind face turned toward the door. And Vornak stood and counted and did not weep, because someone had to be steady for the child, and let the gold light fall on his 91-year-old face and thought. In the one small private room of himself he never showed anyone that whatever the rest of his life held, he had lived to stand in the light of a thing he had guarded blind for 91 years, and it had been worth the whole of the guarding. "He did it," Ripnot said, and his voice cracked clean down the middle. "Ancestors, he's 7. He did it, Vornak agreed, and permitted himself, for exactly one breath, to close his eyes in the gold light, because the child was alive and the trust was kept, and for one breath the old curse-breaker let that be all there was in the world. It was the last easy breath any of them would take for a long time. Because the gold light was still spilling from the reliquary door when up through a mile of blue rock in the marble hall where the daylight coin was counted, and then in the middle levels, and then in the deep ones, and then everywhere at once all through the vast stone body of the bank, the alarms of Gringotts began all at once to scream. Vornak's eyes came open. "No," he said very quietly, and it was not a word of surrender. It was a curse-breaker reading, in the pitch and the pattern of an alarm he had known for 91 years, exactly what had happened and exactly how bad it was. "That is not the front door. That is the 4th century seal on the sealed passage, the one we walled up and forgot. Someone has opened it from outside. Someone has come into the old deep behind us, while our whole strength stood here with its back to the dark." His head turned slow toward the blackness at the far end of the threshold chamber, the blackness they had all been ignoring because the only thing that mattered was the door in front of them. "They waited for us to move the guard, they waited for today, and they are already inside. They had chosen their moment with care, because Aurelian Rook did nothing without care." Silas Vane had watched the bank for 3 weeks, and he had learned the one thing that mattered, which was that the goblins guarded the old deep with a rotating watch of a fixed and modest size, because in 1,000 years nothing had ever required more. And he had reasoned correctly that on the day the goblins finally took the warden to the door, they would break that rule. They would strip the upper levels and the side approaches and pour their whole strength down into the deep to stand at the threshold while the child went in, because that was the one thing worth their whole strength, and they were only mortal, and even goblins cannot be strong everywhere at once. So he had waited for the guard to move. And that morning, when his watchers reported that the director himself had gone down, that the Keeper of Seals had been carried down, that the curse-breakers had gone down in a ring around a small figure, Vane had smiled his flat smile and sent the word, and the 2 halves of Rook's plan had begun to move at once. The first half came up the white steps in daylight, lawful and loud. Aloysius Crane, gray and exact, with a warrant of emergency requisition freshly signed by a magistrate who owed the committee a favor, and behind him 6 ministry enforcers in the robes of the Department of Magical Law, there to take into the nation's custody by force if the void was resisted, the instrument of the founding age, and to detain, for its protection, the minor in whose keeping it unlawfully remained. It was a lie dressed as a law, and it did not need to be believed. It only needed to make noise at the front door, and turn the eyes and the whole bristling regard of the bank up toward the marble hall, while the second half of the plan went the other way, and it made its noise. Crane and his 6 enforcers came through the bronze doors and past the warning carved in the marble, and Crane read his void requisition aloud in his dry, exact voice to a hall of tellers who did not stop weighing coin. And when the goblin officer of the hall told him flatly that the bank did not recognize his paper and that he would leave or be removed, Crane did the thing he had rehearsed, which was to raise his voice and demand in the name of the ministry immediate access to the deep vaults and the surrender of the child unlawfully detained within them, and his enforcers drew their wands, and the goblins of the marble hall rose from their high desks all at once without hurry, the way a tide rises, and for the space of a held breath the oldest bank in Britain and the Ministry of Magic stood a wand's length from a war that neither had fought in 300 years. It was exactly the distraction Rook had bought it to be. Every eye in the marble hall was on the gray man and his 6 wands. Not one of them was on the sealed passage, 4 centuries forgotten, a mile below, where a struck-off cursebreaker was lifting the last strand of an old lock and stepping through into the dark behind the guard. The second half was Sela's vein, and 3 men as hollow as himself, and they did not come up the steps. They came in from below, through a passage the goblins had sealed and forgotten 400 years ago, whose seal vein had spent 3 weeks quietly unpicking 1 strand at a time, and it led out, as Rook's oldest and most expensive map had promised, onto the old deep behind the door past the threshold, on the wrong side of the entire assembled guard of Gringotts, who stood in a ring at the mouth of the warden's chamber with their backs to the dark and their whole attention on the child who had just gone. Rook himself came with the second half, which was the one detail Vane had argued against and lost. "You do not go into the field," Vane had said in his flat, soft voice the night before. "You pay men like me so that you do not have to." And Rook had looked at him with the patience of 40 years and answered, "I have waited my whole life to stand in the presence of a living relic of the founders. I have held a dozen dead ones. I am not going to send a hireling to be the first man in 1,000 years to see the Great One wake and hear about it afterward over brandy. Some things a man must witness with his own eyes, Sela's, or the whole of his life was administration." So Rook came down into the dark behind Vane, immaculate even in the wet stone passage, his beautiful hands folded, his silver hair swept back, and in his breast pocket, wrapped in silk, he carried a thing he had prepared with great care against exactly this hour. A vial no larger than a thumb of the child's own blood, drawn without the child ever knowing, off the rim of a cup at a library table in Little Winging. On the one afternoon Harry Potter had refused a kind stranger his name and given him, all unknowing, something worth far more. And the alarm screamed because a sealed door 4 centuries shut had just been opened by a hand that was not a goblin's, and every creature in the bank knew in the same instant that the one thing that must never happen was happening, that on the day the warden claimed his charge, the wolves had found a way into the fold. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6, those who covet Harry came out of the reliquary into a battle. He had gone in a child and come out a warden, and the difference showed in the first half-second, because a child would have frozen and the warden did not. He stepped through the golden light of the inner door into the domed threshold chamber and read the whole of it in one sweep, the way Vornek had taught him to read a vault, not the loud things first but the shape of the whole. The ring of goblins no longer facing him but turned outward, toward the black mouth of a passage that should not have been there, at the far side of the chamber, the blued rods raised and spitting a cold blue fire that was not quite lightning. 4 men in the dark of that passage, moving, low and spread and unhurried, the movement of people who had done this before, and standing a little apart from all of it at the edge of the light, immaculate and unhurried and entirely out of place in the wet ancient dark, a tall spare man with silver hair swept back in beautiful folded hands, watching the fight the way a man watches whether he has arranged. He had 1 hour of being a warden behind him, and the hour had rearranged him. The child who had walked down into the blue would have looked at 4 armed men in a fight and felt the world tilt. The warden who walked out looked at the same scene and saw a problem with a shape, and shapes could be worked. He noted the count, 4 intruders, 2 already bound, which left 2, one of them the broad soft one who moved wrong meaning too well, too economically, a man who had been taught the same discipline the goblins had taught Harry and had used it to become a knife instead of a shield. He noted the plinth and the stone turning above it, and the way every goblin in the wedge kept one shoulder angled toward it, guarding it, which meant the enemy had made them believe the stone was the target, which meant the stone was probably not the target, because a good cursebreaker never lets you see what he is truly reaching for. And he noted the old man at the edge of the light who was not fighting, who had come a mile down into the wet dark in a coat that had never seen a day's dirt, and who was watching Harry and only Harry, and Harry understood before a word was spoken that whatever the men with the knives were for, the man in the clean coat was the danger because he was the one who wanted, and wanting was the engine of the whole machine. "Mr. Rook," Harry said. The silver head turned and the warm reaching smile from the library came back onto the beautiful face, and this time it did not reach the eyes because there was no longer any reason to pretend. "Warden," said Aurelian Rook, and inclined his head, mockingly precise, the exact courtesy the goblins gave, turned inside out. You have your title now, I see, it suits you. I felt it wake even up in the passage. 40 years I have waited to feel a founding relic wake, and it woke for a 7-year-old, and I confess I have not decided whether that is the most beautiful thing I have ever witnessed or the most obscene. He took a single step into the light. Do not run. There is nowhere to run, and running would spoil the last shred of dignity available to either of us, and I have always thought dignity was the only thing worth keeping when everything else has gone. Stand where you are and let us talk, because you are, I have come to understand, a person who can be talked to, which is rarer than the stone and almost as valuable. Behind him, the fight was not going the way Rook had bought it to go. Vane's men were very good. They had come with the quiet tools, the binding curses, and the silencing work, meaning to take a chamber full of goblins from behind while the goblins knelt in awe. But the goblins had not been kneeling for more than a breath, and the goblins were on their own ground, the oldest ground they owned, and there is nothing in the world more dangerous than a goblin who has just watched a 1,000-year promise come true and been interrupted, mid-miracle, by thieves. The blued rods were not wands and did not work like wands. They threw a cold binding light that clung and hardened, and 2 of Vane's men were already down, wrapped and struggling in it, and the goblins pressed forward around them in a wedge, low and fast and utterly silent, with Ragnarok himself in the center of the wedge and murder in the set of his old shoulders. But Vane was better than his men. Harry saw it watching, the cold clear part of his mind cataloging even now. The broad soft man moved through the goblin fire without hurry, reading each bolt of it a half-second before it came and simply not being where it landed, and he was working as he moved at the wards of the chamber itself, unpicking the very magic of the place, and where he unpicked it the goblin fire guttered, so that with every 10 feet he advanced the wedge's fire grew a little thinner, and Harry understood, with the flat certainty the door had given him, that Silas Vane was going to reach the plinth. And that no goblin in the chamber was going to stop him in time. He watched Vornak try. The old cursebreaker had seen what Harry had seen faster because he had 91 years of seeing it, and he broke from the front of the wedge and moved to cut Vane off from the plinth, not with fire but with his own body and a length of ward cord he snapped taut across the intruder's path, a snare tied in half a second by hands that had been tying snares since before Vane's grandfather was born. And Vane, without breaking stride, without even seeming to look, read the snare and stepped over it and drove the heel of one ruined hand into the old goblin's shoulder, a short, brutal blow with a curse behind it, and Vornak went down onto the blue stone and did not get up at once, and Harry felt it in his own body, the sight of the one who had bowed to him on a gray pavement folded on the ground of the deep. Ripnot cried out and lunged, and that was the error, that was the half-second of the young goblin's attention gone from the dark to his fallen teacher, and Harry saw the whole terrible arithmetic of it laid out a beat before it happened and could do nothing, because he was 30 feet away and 7 years old, and had no wand and no fire and nothing at all but a mind that saw everything and a coin going warm in his fist. The goblins were not losing for want of courage. They were losing for want of the one thing that beats courage, which is a man who has practiced cruelty until it is faster than kindness. Ragnarok's wedge had bound 2 of Vane's 4 and would bind the other 2 in another minute, and a minute was 30 seconds too long because Vane did not need the chamber. He needed one throat and the leverage it bought, and he was already turning toward the soft flank where the Keeper of Seals sat bound in his carried chair with Ripnot staggering to guard him. The founders had built the door to keep out the greedy and the cruel. They had not built the chamber behind it to survive them, because they had never imagined that any hand could open the outer door but the warden's, and so the last shelter of the founding age had exactly one flaw, and the flaw was that once you were inside it, it was only a room, and a room can be taken by a man with a knife. Harry gathered all of it in the space of a breath into the cold, clear place where the useful things lived, and kept his eyes on Rook, and did not let his face show that Vornak was down, because a warden does not give the man across from him a single thing he has not decided to give. "You cannot have it," Harry said to Rook. He said it quietly, and he did not move because he had learned that you do not run, and he had learned something else in the last hour that he had not had words for until this moment, which was that he was the calmest thing in the room, and that the calm was a kind of weapon, and that Rook had not expected it. "I don't mean you shouldn't, I mean you can't, it won't work. You've come a very long way, and you've spent a great deal of someone's blood getting here, and it isn't going to work, and I think part of you already knows that and came anyway, because 40 years is a long time to be wrong, and a man would rather be here and wrong than home and wondering." Rook's beautiful smile did not move, but something behind his eyes did, and Harry saw it and pressed. A mile up in the marble hall, the war that Crane's 6 wands had almost started did not start, because a 7th wizard came through the bronze doors, and the temperature of the room changed. Albus Dumbledore had felt the alarms from 3 streets away, where he had been sitting in a tea shop pretending to read a newspaper, because he had not liked the shape of the last 3 weeks and had taken to keeping himself close to Diagon Alley, and when the wards of Gringotts screamed across the whole of magical London, he he was moving before the cup had finished falling. He came into the marble hall in a swirl of plum and found a ministry official reading a void requisition to Hall of Goblins on the edge of violence, and he took in the whole of it in a glance, the drawn wands, the risen tellers, the grey man's exact and rehearsed outrage, and he did the thing that had made him the most feared wizard in Britain, which was to raise no wand at all and simply be present. So fully and so heavily that every other force in the room became suddenly aware of its own smallness. Aloysius, Dumbledore said pleasantly, and the grey man flinched at the sound of his own first name in that voice. Put your paper away. It is void, you know it is void, the goblins know it is void, and I know it is void, which makes you the only person in this hall pretending otherwise, and it is beneath you. You were a competent clerk once. You have let someone make you a battering ram. His blue eyes moved over the 6 enforcers, and one by one their wands lowered, not by any spell, but by the oldest magic of all, which is a young man's understanding that he has wandered into a fight he was never meant to be in. The child who woke whatever has been woken here is under my protection, and under the banks, and those two protections have not always agreed this month, but they agree entirely on the subject of you. Whatever is happening below, you are the diversion, Aloysius. You have been spent. Someone wanted the bank looking at your paper and not at its own sellers, and it worked, and I am going to go and undo it, and you are going to stand here and think very carefully about whose battering ram you agreed to be. Aloysius Crane's grey face worked, and for a moment the functionary in him tried to muster the outrage the morning had rehearsed, the mandate, the committee, the public interest, all the parchment armor of 11 years spent administering nothing. And then he looked at the risen tellers and at his own 6 enforcers with their wands drooping, and at the ancient wizard who had not raised a wand at all, and something in the careful grey machinery of him understood. The way a clerk understands a ledger that will not balance no matter how many times he adds the column, that he had been the sum that did not balance, that a man he had believed a patron had used the one honest hunger of his life, the hunger to matter. To point him like a wand at the door of the oldest bank in Britain. He did not withdraw the requisition then, that would come later in a quieter room with a great deal less dignity. But he lowered the paper an inch, and it was the beginning of the lowering, and Dumbledore saw it and did not press, because he had broken enough men in 100 years to know that a man breaking of his own accord should be given the room to finish. He turned to the goblin officer of the hall and inclined his head deep with a respect Crane had not shown. I made a promise to that child, Dumbledore said, that if it ever came to more than the goblins could hold, I would stand in the doorway on his side. I do not know if it has come to that, but I heard your ward scream, and I find I am not willing to wait and see. I have no right to the deep vaults. I ask leave to go down, not as the chief warlock, not as anyone's guardian, but as one old creature who gave a 7-year-old his word. Will the bank grant it? The goblin officer looked at the old wizard for a long moment. Above them, faintly, the alarms still rang. And whatever the officer saw in the ancient face, it was enough, because the bank did not grant leave to wizards to walk its deep passages, had not in 300 years, and the officer granted it now, with a single word and a jerk of the head toward the inner door. And Albus Dumbledore went down into the dark of Gringotts at a pace no man his age should have been able to keep, following the pull of a promise toward a child a mile below, and knowing, with the cold clarity that had never once failed him and had never once made him happy, that he was probably going to be too late, because he was always in the end a little too late, and it was the great grief of his long life. Tell me why it won't work, Rook said. His voice was pleasant, conversational, a man drawing out a clever child at a dinner party, and only a listener as trained as Harry had become would have heard the thin wire of tension running under the pleasantness. Indulge an old scholar. I have read every surviving word about the founding relics, Warden. I know more about the thing turning above that plinth than any living soul except now you. Tell me the one thing I have missed, since you are so certain I have missed it. The charter has a clause, Harry said. The clause of free naming. I've read it. I had to learn it by heart. The vigil shelters only what the warden freely names as his own, freely, not a name given under duress. Not blood taken by force or by trick. He let his eyes go deliberately to Rook's breast pocket, and had the cold satisfaction of watching the old man realize that the child knew about the vial, that the child had worked out from a flicker at a library table 3 weeks ago, that a stranger who wanted his name had gotten something else instead. You've got my blood in your pocket. You took it off a cup. I felt it go, actually. I just didn't know what I'd felt until now, a little cold place on the rim where your fingers had been, and it's worth nothing. The stone knows the difference between a gift and a theft, because the people who made it understood that the only power worth guarding is the kind that can't be stolen. Your vial won't open a door or lift the stone or raise the vigil, because it isn't freely given, and it never will be, because I know now that you have it, and a thing you know was taken can never be a thing you give. He took one step toward Rook, which surprised the old man more than a step back would have. You've spent 40 years learning that the relics answer to blood, but you learned it wrong. They don't answer to blood, they answer to consent. Blood is just how they find the person whose consent is worth having, and you can't take consent. That's the whole point of it. That's the thing the founders built the entire trust to protect. For a moment Aurelian Rook was silent, and in the silence the goblin fire crackled and a man cried out somewhere, and Sela's vein advanced another patient 10 feet toward the plinth. Then Rook laughed softly, and it was the coldest sound Harry had heard in a life that had contained Vernon Dursley's every register of contempt. "You have read the clause," Rook said, "and you have read it beautifully, and you have missed, because you are 7 and cannot help it, the single word in it that damns you, freely. The vigil answers to what the warden freely gives, and you imagine that freely is a wall, a thing that keeps me out. It is not a wall. It is a door, and doors can be walked through if one is patient about the walking. I have made an entire study, Harry, of how a person comes to give a thing freely. It is the oldest art there is. It is what every church and every court and every parent who ever broke a child has always practiced, and I have practiced it longer and more coldly than any of them, and I promise you that there is no fortress in a human soul that cannot, with time and loneliness and the correct rationing of kindness, be persuaded to open its own gate from the inside and call the opening a gift." He tilted his silver head. "You are not wrong that the stone knows theft from gift. You are wrong that the difference protects you. It only means I must take the long way round, and I have already told you I am a patient man." "You're a patient man who's run out of patience," Harry said. "You said so yourself 30 seconds ago. You told Vane to move to the short plan, so all your studying, all your long way round, and the second a 7-year-old told you a true thing you didn't like, you reached for a knife. That's not patience, Mr. Rook. That's a man who's been telling himself a story about how patient he is for 40 years, and finding out right now in front of a child that underneath the story he's just another person who takes what he wants when the taking gets hard." He held the old man's eyes. "I know that kind of person. I was raised by one. He was fatter than you and worse dressed, and he never read a book in his life, but underneath he was exactly the same. And I'll tell you the one thing I learned from 7 years of him, since we're trading true things. People who take are never as patient as they think, and they always overreach at the end, because taking is a hunger, and hunger can't wait. You just overreached. You just showed me the knife, and a man who's shown you his knife has told you he's got nothing better." "Consent," Rook said. "Oh, you clever, clever child. You are exactly right, and you have understood in an hour what took me 40 years, and you have made precisely the mistake that every good heart makes about men like me, which is to believe that being right is the same as being safe." He spread his beautiful hands. "You are correct. The stone will not obey stolen blood. It will not raise its shelter for a name given at knife point. I have known this in truth for some years. I told myself otherwise because the alternative was unbearable, but a man of my discipline cannot lie to himself forever, and I stopped this spring and faced the thing squarely. The vigil cannot be commanded. It can only be given, freely, by the warden, willingly." He took a step and another, closing the distance, and his voice did not rise, and that was the horror of it. "And a warden, Harry, is a person. And persons can be brought over time with patience and with the correct arrangement of their circumstances to give willingly a great many things they would never have given at knife point. You know this. You know it better than any child alive. You spent 7 years in a cupboard learning exactly how a small person comes to want to please the large people who decide whether he eats. I am not going to force you to give me the vigil. I am going to take you home and raise you and be the only kindness in your life, and in 10 years or 15 you will give it to me freely, gratefully, because I will have made myself the whole of your world, and you will not even feel the walls. It is a long plan. I am a patient man, and you at 7 are wonderfully young to begin." Harry looked at him. He had faced in his short life a great many people who wanted to make him small. He had never before faced one who understood so exactly how it was done, who had studied the machinery of it the way Vornak studied wards, and who was proposing calmly in the wet gold dark to do it to him on purpose, patiently, for as long as it took. And the cold, clear part of his mind, which never fully stopped, understood that this was the real danger, the one the goblin fire could not touch, that a man could not steal the vigil but could, given years and a child and enough loneliness, grow a warden who would hand it over and call it love. And then the cold, clear part of his mind did the thing it always did, which was to keep going past the alarm of it to the flaw, because there was always a flaw. Vornak had taught him that on the first day, with a stone that could not be forced but could be read, look at where the line almost breaks, that is where the truth lives, that is where you begin. "That would work," Harry said slowly, "on the child I was 3 months ago. You're right about him. He'd have taken any kindness from anyone and been grateful and given you anything because he didn't know he was worth more than the scraps. You're a very good reader of that child." He lifted his chin. "But you've made the same mistake twice now, Mr. Rook, and it's the mistake clever certain men always make, and I'm going to tell you what it is for free because you told me your plan for free and it's only fair. You think I'm the child in the cupboard. I'm not anymore. I stopped being him about an hour ago in a room you'll never see, when I looked at everything I ever wanted and told it no. I've already passed the test you're describing. The stone gave it to me first. It showed me my mother alive with her arms open and told me to take what I came for, and I said no, because a thing that matters is not a thing you take. So you're too late. You needed the child who didn't know his own worth, and he's gone, and the person standing here instead knows exactly what he's worth, because 4 dead people in a room full of goblins just spent a miracle telling him. You can't grow a warden who will hand you the vigil out of loneliness. I'm not going to be lonely again. I found people. He did not look at the goblins. He did not have to. That's the flaw in your patient plan. You were counting on me having no one, and I have someone now, several someones, and you can't outwait that because it's already happened. Something in Aurelian Rook's beautiful face closed, like a door, like a fist, and the pleasantness went out of it all at once, and what was underneath was very old and very tired and very cold, 40 years of hunger with the manners stripped off. No, he agreed quietly, I cannot outwait it. You are correct again, and I find I am done being corrected by a child. He turned his silver head a fraction, not taking his eyes off Harry, and called into the fighting dark in a voice gone flat and businesslike. Silas, the long plan is closed, we move to the short one. And then to Harry, almost gently, almost with regret, you should not have told me that you have someone. It was the one honest thing you have said, and it was a mistake, because now I know where to press. A patient man learns to be an impatient one when the patience is taken from him. Watch now, watch what it costs to have someone when the man across from you has no one and has made his peace with it. It happened very fast, the way the worst things do. Silas Vane stopped advancing toward the plinth. He had been 10 feet from the stone, close enough to reach it, and Harry had been certain that the stone was what they wanted, and Harry had been wrong, and the wrongness was the trap, because Vane had never truly been going for the stone at all. The stone was the bait that kept the goblin's wedge pressed forward to defend it. Vane turned in the half-second the order gave him, away from the plinth and toward the flank of the goblin wedge, toward the place where the smallest and the oldest of them stood a little apart, because someone had to guard the keeper of seals in his carried chair, and the someone was Ripknot, who was young and quick and had been watching Harry and not the dark. Vane's quiet tools were quiet. There was no flash, no cry. There was only a sound like a held breath let go, and a cold gray light that closed around Ripknot and Agner both, the young cursebreaker and the blind old keeper, binding them where they stood, and a second sound softer, as Vane crossed the last of the distance and simply took hold of the back of Ripknot's collar with one ruined hand, and set against the side of the young goblin's throat, a short, dull length of something that was not quite a knife and was worse than a knife, a cursed blade. Its edge running with the same cold gray light, an edge that did not cut so much as unmake. Warden, said Vane in his flat, soft voice, not even breathing hard, be still. The whole chamber stopped. The goblin fire died, not because the goblins had surrendered, but because Ragnarok had raised one hand flat, the ancient sign to hold, because a director who had watched his people for 300 years knew the exact instant when pressing forward would cost him a life he was not willing to spend. Ripknot hung very still in Vane's grip and did not struggle, because he too knew what the gray edge was, and Agner, bound beside him, turned his blind face toward Harry and said, in a voice that carried across the silent chamber, clear and steady and entirely unshaken, do not, Warden. Whatever they ask, do not. We are old and we are goblins, and we have known since before you were born that guarding a thing this size might cost us everything, and we came anyway, and we would come again. Do not trade the trust for us. That is not what a warden does. Let them take me. I have seen the vigil wake. I have nothing left to want. Quiet, said Vane without heat, and pressed the gray edge a fraction closer to Ripknot's throat, and Ripknot made a sound, small and involuntary, and it went into Harry like a blade of its own. Ragnarok spoke then from the center of the held wedge, and his voice was the flat, cold voice of a director who has done this arithmetic many times across 300 years and hated every answer. You are inside the oldest ground the goblin nation owns, he said to Vane, to Rook, to the dark. You have laid an edge on the throat of a goblin of Gringotts in Gringotts on the day the warden woke. Whatever you take from this place, you do not leave it. There is no passage out of the old deep we do not hold, no surface do you reach before my people reach it. No country on the earth where a man who spilled a cursebreaker's blood in the deep vaults may sleep a single night unhunted. You have already lost. You are merely deciding now how much you spend before you admit it. He did not move. Let the young one go and put down the edge, and I will grant you the mercy of a clean death instead of the one you have earned, which is to be given, living, to the dragons that guard the high vaults, as your kind was given in the old wars. That is the whole of my offer. It will not improve. It is a generous offer, said Rook pleasantly, not troubling to look at the director, and it assumes that I intend to leave by any door you hold. I do not. I intend to leave by the warden, who's going to walk me out through the front of your bank in the middle of your people, carrying your own miracle in his 2 hands, because you will not raise a wand while the edge is at your cursebreaker's throat, and neither will he. You have guarded this place against thieves for 1,000 years, director. You never guarded it against a thief who brought his own key and taught it to love him. That was always the flaw. I merely found it before you did. And he turned his back on Ragnarok, deliberately, the final insult, and gave the whole of his cold, ancient attention to the only person in the chamber he considered worth persuading. Aurelian Rook walked unhurried into the center of the chamber, into the gold light spilling from the reliquary, and stood beside the plinth where the vigil stone turned slow and full of fallen stars, and looked at Harry across the little distance with his cold, tired ancient hunger, and made his offer in a voice as gentle as a hand on a shoulder. "Here is the short plan, Warden, since the long one is closed to me," Rook said. "It is very simple, and you will understand it at once, because you understand everything at once, which is the tragedy of you. You are going to take up the stone. You are going to carry it in your own 2 hands freely and walk out of this place at my side, and you are going to do it because if you do not, the man behind you is going to draw that edge across your friend's throat, and then the old blind ones, and then, if need be, across every goblin in this room, one at a time, while you watch, until you decide that the trust is not worth more to you than the lives of the people you were so quick, a moment ago, to claim you had found." He spread his beautiful hands. "You told me the vigil cannot be given under duress. You are right, so I am not asking you to give me the vigil. I am asking you to give me you freely to spare your friends and to bring the stone along, and we will settle the question of the shelter later over years in a warm house where you will have a great deal of time to reconsider what freely means. Choose, Harry, you have someone now. I told you that would be a mistake. This is the shape of the mistake. This is what it costs." And Harry Potter, 7 years old, warden of the vigil for the space of 1 hour, stood in the gold light a mile beneath London with the fallen star turning at his side, and the whole of everything he had found in his short, starved life held at the edge of an unmaking blade, and understood that Rook had built the one trap the Founders had not warded against, because the Founders had guarded the vigil against greed and cruelty and theft, and had never thought to guard the warden against love. Because to the Founders love had been the answer and not the wound, and the cold, clear part of his mind, the part that had kept him alive in a cupboard and was going to have to keep him alive now, laid the problem out in front of him with the flat honesty he had trained it to, because a problem you flinch from is a problem you cannot solve. Rook wanted him to carry the stone out. If he refused, Ripnot died, and then Agner, and then the rest, one by one, and Harry would have kept the trust and lost the only people who had ever wanted him. If he agreed, he saved them now and lost everything later, because Rook would spend years turning him into a boy who handed over the vigil and called it gratitude, and the stone that had been made to shelter children would become a thing that a cold man used to make himself untouchable. 2 doors, both of them wrong. And Vornak's voice in his memory from the first day, from the first lesson: "When both answers are wrong, you have not yet found the real question. The one they gave you is a trap, find the one they didn't." So Harry, standing in the gold light with the blade at his friend's throat, did the hardest arithmetic of a life that had been nothing but hard arithmetic, and he did not ask himself which door to take, because both doors led to a room Rook had built. He asked himself the other question, the door question, the one the Founders had asked and the one the stone had asked and the one no one hunting him had ever thought to ask, because they were all so busy asking what the vigil could do. He asked what it was for, and the moment he asked it, the answer was already there, had been there since the Founders' echo spoke it in the chord, plain and enormous and entirely his. It was for the keeping of what cannot keep itself, not for hiding, not for hoarding. Not for making one small warden safe in a warm house at the price of the world, for keeping, for sheltering the ones who could not shelter themselves. And there were, at this exact moment, in this exact chamber, a great many souls who could not shelter themselves, and every single one of them was on Harry's side of the room. The Founders had not left the warden defenseless against love. They had made love the key. Rook had it exactly backward, as clever certain men always did, and the backwardness was the flaw, and the flaw was where Harry began. He looked at Ripnot, held still against the grey edge. He looked at Ripnot, held still against the grey edge. He looked at Agner, bound and blind and unafraid, telling him with the whole of his old face to refuse. He looked at Vornak, risen now to one knee at the front of the frozen wedge, one hand pressed to the shoulder Vane had struck, whose iron-colored eyes were fixed on him with an expression the old cursebreaker had never once shown him, which was helplessness, the pure helplessness of a creature who has taught a child everything he knows and cannot teach him the way out of this, because there is no way out of this that a cursebreaker knows. And he looked last at the stone. The cord had gone very quiet. The vigil stone turned slow above its plinth, full of its cold falling lights, and it was waiting, Harry understood, waiting as it had waited 1,000 years, patient and vast and entirely his, for its warden to decide what it was for. "Take what you came for," the first door had said, and it had been a trap. "Do not trade the trust for us," the blind keeper said now, and it was love, and it was wrong, and Harry knew it was wrong, and could not have said why yet, only that somewhere between the clause he had learned by heart and the star turning at his side there was a door, one more door that would open to exactly one hand, and that he was the hand, and that he had perhaps 3 seconds to find it before the grey edge moved. "Wait," Harry said. His voice did not shake. He was surprised, distantly, that it did not shake. "Wait," he said again, to Rook, to Vane, to the whole frozen chamber, and he lifted one hand, palm up, the shape of the mark on the door, the shape of the seal, the oldest shape he owned. Something in that deliberate, unhurried gesture made the chamber go still in a new way, It was not the stillness of the blade, the held breath of hostages and the men who hold them. It was the stillness of a room that has felt, without understanding it, the ground shift under its feet. Vane's flat, patient eyes narrowed. Rook, who had spent 40 years learning to read the exact instant when a negotiation turned, felt it turn, and could not for once tell which way, and the not knowing put the first true crack into the beautiful calm he had worn down a mile of dark. Even the Vigil stone, turning slow above its plinth, seemed to line, the cold lights inside it wheeling toward the small raised hand as a compass swings toward the pole. "You want me to choose," Harry said. "All right, I'll choose. But I'm going to do it properly, the way I do everything, and that means I get to understand it first. And there's one thing about this stone that none of you understand, not you, Mr. Rook, with your 40 years, not you, Mr. Vane, with your quiet knife, not even you, Vornak, and you taught me everything." He closed the raised hand slowly into a fist, and far down in the fist unseen, a 1,000-year-old coin went warm against his palm, and the warmth ran up his arm and met the older, vaster warmth that had lived under his ribs since the star first woke to him, and the two of them turned together toward the turning stone. "It's the same thing I understood about the door. You've all been asking what the Vigil can do, whether you can command it, whether you can carry it out. Whether you can grow a warden who will hand it over, and that was never the question, not once. The question is what it's for." He looked, for the first time since he had come out of the reliquary, directly at Ripnot, held still against the unmaking edge, at Agner bound and blind, at Vornak on one knee in his own guarding blood, at the whole ring of the goblins who had found a boy in a cupboard and made room in the world for a warden. "And I'm the only person in this room who's allowed to answer it. So step back from my friend Mr. Vane and watch. You wanted to see a founding relic wake, you're about to, you're just not going to like what it wakes for." Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, the naming of the ward. Harry turned to the stone. He did not reach for it with his hands. He had learned in the hour behind him that the Vigil stone was not a thing you took hold of but a thing you agreed with, and so he reached for it the other way, reached as he had reached for the warmth under his ribs on 9 nights of dreaming, and the stone, which had been leaning toward him since he lifted his hand, met him halfway. The chord came up out of the silence. 4 notes and then his own, the 5th, and this time he did not merely stand inside the sound but took his place in it, and the taking felt like coming in out of a cold he had lived in so long he had stopped calling it cold, and words rose in him. They were not words he had learned. They were older than the tongue he thought in, older than English, older than the gobbledygook the goblins had taught him in the evenings, and they came up from the place where the blood keeps what the mouth was never told, and Harry opened his mouth and let them come, and his high, clear 7-year-old voice filled the domed chamber a mile beneath London with a language no living creature had heard spoken aloud in 1,000 years. He did not understand the words as words. He understood them as meaning, the way you understand the meaning of your own heartbeat. "I am the warden, I keep what cannot keep itself. What is freely mine, I freely shelter. And no hand shall take by force the thing I hold in trust, for the trust is not a treasure to be won but a watch to be kept, and I keep it, and I am the keeping, now and while I live, and down the red thread after me, world without ending." The stone answered. It rose off its plinth. Not the hand's breadth it had floated before, but up into the air of the chamber, turning, and the cold lights inside it woke all at once. No longer scattered points but a whole firmament, a night sky folded into a thing the size of 2 fists and now unfolding, pouring its buried starlight out into the buried dark, and the rose gold that had run along the door and the seal and the founder's marks bloomed out of the stone in a great slow wave. And where it touched the pale gray walls, the walls remembered 1,000 years of being a shelter and shone. "Now," said Aurelian Rook, and for the first time the pleasantness was entirely gone from his voice, and under it was the raw naked want of 40 years. "Now, boy, you take it up and you carry it and you come with me or the edge." "I'm not going to take it up," Harry said. "That's what you never understood. Nobody takes it up. That's the whole point of it." And he named his ward. He did not name himself. That was the thing Rook had been certain of. The axle his whole cold plan turned on, that a starved and frightened child, given a power that could make one person in all the world untouchable, would make it himself, because that was what everyone did, that was what Rook himself would have done, that was what 40 years of hunger had taught him every soul secretly wanted. He had built his trap around a boy who would, at the last, save himself. Harry did not save himself. He looked at Ripnot held against the unmaking edge, and he spoke the young goblin's name aloud into the rising light. "Ripnot," he said, "who found me, who tied a false knot into a live ward to keep me safe and thought it was a game. I name you mine, and I shelter you." The Vigil answered the name. A dome of cold gold light, thin as a bubble and older than the mountain above it, bloomed out from the risen stone and swept across the chamber and closed around Ripnot where he stood, and the unmaking edge of Sela's Vane's cursed blade, which could cut through stone and ward and the substance of the world itself, came up against that thin gold shell and stopped as though it had struck the root of everything, and the gray light of it guttered and shrank and went out unmade. Because the Vigil did not fight the blade, the Vigil simply declared that inside its light no harm could come to what the warden had named, and against that declaration the blade was not a weapon but a rude and impossible idea, and the world, choosing between them, chose the founders. Vane let go, he had to. His ruined hand would not close on the sheltered goblin, could not, the way a hand cannot close on the far side of a wall, and Rip not stepped free of him into the gold light hole. And Harry saw in the raising of it what the vigil truly was, and understood at last why 4 of the greatest hands the world had ever grown had spent a winter binding a fallen star. It was not a barrier of force, though it stopped force. It was not a wall of fire, though it burned like the cold heart of a star. It was a decision made visible. The founder's own oldest conviction hung in the air where anyone could stand inside it, that the small and the loved and the ones who cannot keep themselves are worth the whole labor of the mighty, and that the proof of any power is not what it can break but what it will bend itself to shelter. The gold of it was not a color so much as a held breath, the light a hearth throws on the faces around it, multiplied 1,000-fold and made unbreakable, and where it fell the ancient chamber lit up with the particular warmth of a place where a child is safe, which is the one warmth the outside dark between the stars has never once contained, and which 4 people had reached up into that dark and stolen a piece of a star to bring home and make. Harry stood at the center of it with the whole of that meaning pouring through his small hands, and he did not feel large and he did not feel powerful. He felt like a door held open. He felt like the last knot in a rope 1,000 years long. He felt exactly and entirely like a keeper, and it was the truest he had ever been. Agner, Harry said, and the dome widened and swept the bound and blind old keeper into its shelter, and the gray cords that held him frayed and fell away, because they were a force laid upon one the warden had claimed, and no force laid upon the warden's own could stand inside the vigil. Who taught me to feel the dead hands in the wax? I name you mine, and I shelter you. The old keeper turned his blind face up into the light he could not see and could feel, and down the deep runnels of his ancient cheeks the wet brightness ran again, and he did not wipe it away. Vornak, Harry said, and his voice did not shake, and the dome widened again and gathered in the old cursebreaker on his knee, and the curse in his struck shoulder loosened and let go, and the old goblin came to his feet inside the gold. Who bowed to me on a gray pavement and fed me first and taught me to look at where the line almost breaks. I name you mine, and I shelter you. And then Harry did not stop. The dome had a size, and the size was growing, and he felt the whole assembled guard of the old deep standing inside the wideness of the founder's work, and he named them, not one by one now, but all at once, the way you gather a whole harvest into your arms. And every goblin who came down into the dark today to stand at a door for a promise 1,000 years old, who kept faith with a child they had never met because their people had given their word, I name you mine. I name you mine. I shelter you, every one. And the dome swept out to the walls of the chamber and closed over the whole of the guard of Gringotts, over Ragnak on his feet in the center of it with his old face turned up like a boy's, over all of them, 100 goblins standing in a shelter made of a fallen star by 4 dead hands and raised, at last, by the smallest of them all. And the light did not stop at the walls. Harry felt it want to keep going. He felt the vigil waked and answering its warden after 1,000 years of the dark, straining outward past the chamber, past the old deep, up through a mile of stone, wanting to name and shelter everything its warden loved. And Harry stood at the center of it with his arms full of the whole world he had found in 3 short months, and understood that he could, that if he asked it, the vigil would rise over Diagon Alley and over Little Winging and over every child in every cupboard in Britain. And that he was 7 years old and it would burn him out like a candle in a gale to hold that much, and that this too was a kind of test, the last one, the one the founders had built into the very generosity of the thing, that a warden who loved the whole world at once would try to shelter the whole world at once and break in the shelter with him. So Harry, weeping, laughing, a mile under London with a firmament in his hands, did the hardest and wisest thing of the whole long day. He held. He drew the light back to the size he could keep, the size of a chamber and the souls in it, and he let the rest of the world go on unsheltered for now, because a watch that ends in a night is no watch at all, and he meant to keep this one for the whole of his life. Not yet, he whispered to the stone, to the founders, to the straining generous light. I'm only 7, but I'll grow, make room, and I'll grow into it, I promise, just not all at once, not tonight. And the vigil, which had waited 1,000 years and could wait a lifetime more, drew in, and settled, and shone, patient and vast, kept at last by the child who had understood, at the very last, that even shelter must be given at the size the giver can bear, or it is not shelter but a fire. That left the 2 who had not been named. Silas Vane stood with his unmade blade dead in his ruined hand, on the wrong side of a wall of gold light, and he was, for the first time in the flat gray years since the guild had struck him off, entirely without a plan. He had built his whole hollow life on the certainty that any lock could be broken by a man patient and skilled and unscrupulous enough, and he stood now before the one door in the world that could not, because it was not a lock at all but a promise kept, and there was nothing in his stripped and expert soul that knew what to do in the presence of a promise. He looked at the gold light. He looked at the goblin standing safe inside it, at the young one he had held and lost, and something moved in his flat eyes that might, in a man who had not spent 10 years killing it, have been the beginning of understanding. Aurelian Rook did not move at all. He stood at the edge of the light with his beautiful hands empty at his sides and his silver head lifted, and he looked at the risen vigil, at the star unfolded, at the founder's work awake and shining after the 1,000 years he had spent hunting a single waking spark of it. And Harry, watching him, understood that he was seeing the one thing Aurelian Rook had wanted his whole life, close enough to touch, shining, real, and forever, absolutely and by its own oldest law, not his. 40 years of scholarship in gold and patience and quiet cruelty had brought him at last into the presence of a living founding relic, and it had woken, and it had raised its shelter, and it had gathered into that shelter 100 goblins and a scarred child and left him, Aurelian Rook, the finest relic scholar in Britain, standing outside in the cold and the dark, unnamed, unsheltered, unwanted. Because the thing he had spent his life learning to command had turned out to answer only to a kind of love he had traded away so long ago he could not remember its face. "It's beautiful," Rook said. His voice had gone very quiet. He was not speaking to Harry. He was not, perhaps, speaking to anyone. "I was right. All these years they told me I was mad, and I was right. It is the most beautiful thing in the world, and it is awake, and I am the only man alive who understands what it is." He looked then at Harry, and the look had nothing left in it of the kindly scholar or the patient predator, only a vast and ancient and childish grief. "And it will never, ever be mine." "No," said Harry, not unkindly, because he had discovered that he could not, even now, even here, make himself cruel to a man who wanted a thing so badly, having wanted things badly his whole life. "It was never going to be, not because you weren't clever enough. You were cleverer than anyone. Because you wanted to own it, and it's not a thing you can own. Nobody can. Not you, not the ministry, not even me. You can only keep it, and keeping it means you don't get to have it. You only get to give it away forever to people who need it more than you do." He paused. "You spent 40 years learning everything about it except the one thing that mattered, which is that it was never a prize. It was always a duty dressed up as a prize, to keep exactly the people who wanted a prize from ever being able to hold it. It worked. It worked on you. I'm sorry. I think it's the saddest thing I've ever seen, and I grew up in a cupboard. The goblins took them then, and there was no fight left to take them out of. Vane did not resist. He set the dead blade down on the blue stone, and put his ruined hands behind him, and let the goblins bind them, and said nothing at all, and there was in the set of him the strange, emptied stillness of a man whose one certainty has been taken from him, and who has not yet found anything to put in its place. Rook did not resist either. He let them bind his beautiful hands, and he kept his silver head high, and he looked at the vigil until the last possible moment, when they turned him toward the dark passage he had come in by, and Harry saw him look at it as a man looks at a window closing on the only light he will ever see. And then it was only the goblins and the child and the stone. Harry let the last of the vigil down. It went gently, the gold light sinking back into the blackened starlit stone as the tide goes out, unhurried, leaving the pale chamber lit only by its own faint silver and the ordinary orange of the goblins' lamps, and the vigil stone settled the last hand's breadth onto its plinth and turned there, slow and quiet, humming its 5-note chord so low it was more felt than heard. Harry's knees, which had held him up through the whole of it, discovered all at once that they were the knees of a 7-year-old who had not eaten since morning, and had claimed the guardianship of a fallen star, and they let go, and he sat down abruptly on the cold blue stone, not fainting, only spent, the way a wrung cloth is spent. They came to him then, all of them. Ripknot reached him first and dropped to a crouch in front of him and gripped both of Harry's thin shoulders in his long hands and looked at him, checking him over the way a cursebreaker checks a ward for damage, and found him whole, and made a sound that was half a laugh and half something with no name, and said, "You named me. Out of everyone, you named me first." And Harry, sitting on the stone with his legs no longer working, said, "You found me first, and that was the whole of it, and neither of them needed any more." Vornak came slower, one hand still at his struck shoulder, and lowered himself with a grunt to sit on the cold stone beside the child, an old goblin and a small human side by side with their backs against the plinth of the founder's work, and he did not say anything at all, which from Vornak was a speech, and after a moment he put one arm, awkward, unpracticed, around the thin shaking shoulders, and Harry leaned into the old cursebreaker and let himself, for one moment, be exactly as small and tired and 7 as he was. And Agner the blind keeper was helped to the plinth, and laid his ancient spotted hands upon the vigil stone, upon the fallen star he had guarded blind for 60 years and never touched, and he read it as he read a seal, with the sense beneath his fingers that had no name, and whatever he read there made the ruin of his old face go soft and open and young, and he said to the stone, or to the 4 who made it, or to the child slumped against its plinth, "It is kept, after 1,000 years. It is kept," and no one in the chamber said anything for a while, because there was nothing left in any tongue that would have been large enough, and they simply sat, the guard of the old deep in their warden, in the quiet after the light, and let it be true. It was into that quiet, the quiet after the light, that Albus Dumbledore came down the last of the passage and into the chamber, plum robes gray with the dust of a mile of running, too old and too grand for haste, and having made the whole of the descent at a dead run anyway, and stopped in the mouth of the reliquary threshold and took in the whole of it in a single glance. The bound men, the goblins standing where a shelter had lately been, the old blind keeper with the wet brightness on his cheeks, the risen stone settling slow toward its plinth, and in the center of all of it, one thin-scarred 7-year-old with the last of a firmament fading from his hands. For a long moment the most powerful wizard in Britain did not say anything at all. He had come to stand in a doorway on a child's behalf, as he had promised, and he had run a mile through the dark to do it, and he had arrived to find that the child had needed no one to stand in any doorway, that the child had, in the hour it took an old man to descend, become the doorway and shut it and held it, against a thing Dumbledore himself was not certain he could have held. "I came to help," Dumbledore said at last, and there was something in the old voice that Harry had not heard from any adult in his life, which was a clean and undefended wonder, the wonder of a very old man who has just been surprised by the world, which he had long ago stopped expecting. "I ran the whole way. I broke 3 of my own rules in one of the banks, and I ran the whole way to stand between you and whatever this was. I'm too late, and I find that being too late has never once in the whole of my long life felt like a mercy until now." He looked at the settling stone, at the gold still fading from the walls, and he inclined his head to it deeply, the way one power acknowledges another older and cleaner than itself. "So that is what was woken. I will not ask what it is. I understand now why the goblins would not tell me. Some things are not for the powerful to know. They are only for the trusted to keep." He turned back to Harry. "You kept the door open as you said you would. I have come through it for whatever I am now worth, which is a great deal less than I thought when I started running. What would you have me do, Warden? For once in my life I am asking, and I mean it, and I will do the thing you say." Harry looked at him for a while from where he sat against the plinth with Vornak's arm still awkward around his shoulders, and he did the thing he did with everyone, which was to weigh the old man again, seal-blind, feeling for the deadness of a forgery in the smile with nothing behind it, and he found, as he had found the first time, no deadness, only an ancient, tired, formidable creature who had done cruel things for reasons, and would carry the reasons to his grave, and had tonight. Run a mile through the dark on the strength of a promise to a child he barely knew. "You didn't try to take it," Harry said. "That's the thing I'll remember. You came all this way and you got here, and it's the most powerful thing in the world, and it was lying open in front of you with a tired 7-year-old sitting on the floor, and you didn't even ask what it was. You looked at it and you bowed. Rook spent 40 years and his whole soul trying to have it. You looked at it once and understood you weren't supposed to, and you let it go without anyone making you." He tilted his head, weighing still. "That's the difference between you and him. It's not that he's wicked and you're good. It's that he wanted to own the thing that mattered, and you were willing to just stand near it and keep it safe. That's all being good ever is, I think. I've been thinking about it a lot today." Something happened in the old wizard's face that Harry had not seen an adult's face do before, which was that it simply gave way, all the careful centuries of it, and let a young man look out through the ruins of a very old one for the space of a breath. "I have been called a great many things across 100 years, Dumbledore said unsteadily, "by ministers and enemies and men who worshipped me and men who feared me, and none of them ever taught me anything about myself. And a 7-year-old sitting on a cold floor with a fallen star at his back has just told me the truest thing anyone has ever said to me, which is that the whole of goodness is being willing to stand near the thing that matters and keep it safe without needing to own it." He drew a breath and put the sentries back on, gently, the way you settle a coat over your shoulders. "Very well, here is what I would ask if you will let me. I made you a promise that I would stand in the doorway on your side. Let me keep it, not by taking anything from you, but by being the thing that stands between you and the ministry and the newspapers and the whole hungry world that must never learn what you are. You keep the trust below, I will keep the door above, and neither of us will tell the other one thing more than he needs to know, and we will both, I think, sleep better for it." He inclined his head. "Do we have an arrangement, Warden?" "We have an arrangement," Harry said. "You keep the door, I'll keep the star. And when I'm 11 and I come to your school, you'll treat me like an ordinary boy, because that's the only way it works, and because I'd quite like, for a few years, to find out what being ordinary is like. I never got to try it." "I will treat you," said Dumbledore with the ghost of the unrehearsed laugh from the lesson room, "exactly as ordinarily as I am able, which I confess may not be very, but I will try, and trying, I am learning tonight, is a great deal of what any of this ever is." What Harry had him do was simple, and it undid 100 years of a gray man's patient scheming in an afternoon. The requisition died first. Dumbledore went back up to the marble hall, with Harry's leave and a goblin escort and 2 bound prisoners, and he laid the whole of it before Aloysius Crane in front of the 6 enforcers and the risen tellers and the assembled dignity of the bank. That the committee's emergency warrant had been signed the same morning that a struck-off cursebreaker and a known collector of founding relics had breached the deep vaults. That the 2 events were not a coincidence but a single plan. That Aloysius Crane, whether he had known it or not, had been the loud half of a robbery, the noise at the front door bought and paid for to pull the bank's eyes off its sellers. Crane, gray and exact, went grayer as he understood it, because he was not a wicked man, only a hungry and a used one, and the discovery that his one great mandate had been a con run through him by a man he had thought a patron was a thing that aged him 10 years in the space of a sentence. He withdrew the requisition. He would spend the rest of a short career withdrawing things, and the Committee for the Recovery of Founder Antiquities, having in 100 years recovered nothing at all and lately served as the cat's paw of a thief, was quietly dissolved, and the clause of no sovereign, which had been void-proof for 1,000 years, was never tested in a courtroom, because the men who would have tested it were bound or broken or too ashamed to try. Rook and Vane were given to goblin justice, which is a slower and stranger and more exact thing than the ministries, and which the treaty permitted, since the crime had been committed on goblin ground against goblin persons. What the goblins did with them belongs to the deep records that are not copied, and Harry was not told the particulars and did not ask, because he had discovered in himself no appetite for the details of another creature's punishment, even a creature who had held an unmaking edge to Ripnot's throat. He asked only one thing of Ragnarok in the high chamber afterward, and he asked it as a favor and not as a warden, which the director noted. "Don't let anyone tell Rook about the stone," Harry said. "Whatever you do with him, don't let him hear how it is or where it is or whether it's well. He wanted it his whole life and it's never going to be his, and that's punishment enough for anyone. Don't add to it by letting him know how it's doing without him. Just let it be over for him. Let him not have to think about it anymore." Ragnarok looked at the child for a long moment, and then he did the thing he had done at the head of the blue passage, which was to bow fully from the waist. "You have just asked mercy for the man who came to raise you like a beast for the slaughter of your own soul," the director said, "and you have asked it as a kindness to him and not as a comfort to yourself. Warden, in 300 years of keeping this bank I have met kings and thieves and a great many creatures who called themselves good, and I will tell you what I have learned, since you are young and will need it. The founders did not choose your line for its cleverness, though you are clever, nor for its courage, though you are brave. They chose it for exactly this. For a heart that, holding the whole power of a fallen star, spends its first mercy on its enemy. They were looking 1,000 years ago for you. They only had to wait until you were born." He straightened. "It is done. He will not be told. Go and be 7 for an hour if you still remember how. You have earned it more than anyone alive." There was one thing more the goblins did before the summer ended, and they did it in the high round chamber, with the founding compact glowing in its case of goblin glass on the wall, and they did it not because the compact required it, but because the compact had come, after 1,000 years, to its whole point, and a thing that reaches its whole point deserves to be marked. Ragnarok took the compact down from the wall, which had not been done in 3 centuries, and laid it on the table before Harry, and read from it the clause that bound the goblin nation to guard the warden's door and render the charter to the warden when the warden came of understanding. And then he took a pen of black iron and, in the presence of the whole council, added beneath the 1,000-year-old text a single new line. In the law tongue Harry could now read, and the line said, "Rendered, kept, and confirmed in the hand of the warden Harry, of the house of Potter of the unbroken thread, in the summer of his 7th year, and witnessed." And every goblin in the chamber set a mark beneath it, and last of all they turned the great vellum to Harry and gave him the black iron pen, and Harry, who 3 months before had owned nothing in the world and signed nothing because no one had ever asked his name, wrote his name at the foot of the founding compact of Gringotts in a careful 7-year-old hand, beneath the marks of the 4 founders and 1,000 years of goblins, and became the first human name ever added to it. And the last thing the treaty would ever need. "It is finished," said Ragnarok when the ink had dried, and hung the compact back in its case, and there was in the old director's voice the particular steadiness of a creature who has seen the one thing he did not expect to see before he died. 1,000 years we kept a door for a promise, not knowing if the promise still lived. It lived. It signed its name this afternoon. Whatever comes of the world hereafter, that is done and cannot be undone, and it was worth the whole of the guarding. Go home, Warden. We will see you Thursday." They let him keep being both in the end, which was the only arrangement Harry would have accepted, because he had spent 7 years being told what he was allowed to be and he was finished with it. He would not leave the ordinary world entirely, though the goblins offered, and Dumbledore in his measured way half hoped. He was 7. He wanted still, underneath the warden, to be a boy who learned to ride a bicycle and read books in the library, and did all the small, ordinary human things that a childhood is made of. And he had discovered, in a single day of being enormous, that he did not want to stop being small as well, because the smallness was where the wonder lived, and he was not willing to trade the wonder for the weight. So an arrangement was made, quiet and exact and binding, of the kind the goblins were best at in all the world. He would live where he lived, for now in the house on Privet Drive, because Dumbledore's old protection there was real and mattered, and Harry, having learned to read the shape of things, could see that it did. But the Dursleys would find from that week forward that certain facts had rearranged themselves around the child they had kept in the cupboard without anyone quite explaining how. The cupboard was empty by Sunday. Harry had the second bedroom, and no one in the house could later remember arguing about it. There was always food. There was, once a week, a folded corner and a road to the deep, where an old curse-breaker and a young one and a blind keeper of seals were teaching a warden his trade slowly, the way you teach a thing that will take a life to learn. And there was, on a chain around his neck under his shirt, warm against his sternum where a coin-shaped mark had lived since before he had a name worth the trouble, a flat disc of dark metal cut with an open hand and a star, the warden's coin, the only one of its kind that he was never again without. He thought about the naming in the weeks after more than he thought about anything else, because it was the thing he had done that had surprised him most. He had stood with the power of a fallen star in his hands and the chance to make himself, alone, untouchable forever, and he had not wanted it. He turned that over as he turned everything, looking for the trick in it, because a boy who has been hungry his whole life does not expect to find at the center of himself a thing that would rather feed others. And he decided in the end that it was not a virtue and not a trick, but simply the truth about what a shelter was for, and that the founders had known it, and that this was why they had keyed the greatest defensive magic ever made not to strength or cleverness, but to the one small, ordinary human act of naming what you love and standing in front of it. The vigil had asked him at the last the only question that had ever mattered, not what can you keep safe, but who. And a person's answer to that question, Harry understood, was the whole of who they were. Even Dudley felt the change in his dim way and could not name it. His cousin had come back from that strange summer different, not larger, not louder, but harder to frighten and impossible to make small, and the old games of Harry hunting simply stopped working, the way a game stops working when one player has quietly walked off the field and taken the point of it with him. Harry did not punish him for the years of it. He had held the whole power of a founding relic in his two hands, and it had shown him exactly what taking for yourself did to a soul, in the person of a silver-haired man weeping outside a wall of light, and he had decided at 7 that he would rather be the wall than the man weeping outside it, and you do not become the wall by knocking down children. So he let it go, not as a weakness but as a choice, as he had let his mother's face go in the room of the first door, and Dudley, who had expected retaliation the way the guilty always do, received mercy instead and did not know what to do with it, and was in the smallest and slowest of ways the first person the warden of the vigil ever sheltered outside that buried chamber, without either of them ever knowing it had happened. Petunia never spoke of it. But she looked at him differently after that summer, and only once, standing at the sink with her back to him, she said to the window in a voice he almost did not catch, "She would have been proud of you, Lily, my sister. She was the same, you know. She kept things, people. She'd have been proud." And she never said it again, and Harry never asked her to, because he had learned that some things are given once, at the size the giver can bear, and that you take them as they come and do not reach for more. On the last evening of that first summer, Vornak walked him to the gate of number 4 as he had on the first evening, a lifetime ago, 3 months before. "You will go to the school one day," the old goblin said. They were both looking up at the ordinary sky over the pebble-dash roofs at the first hard stars coming out, the one the 4 of them built in the north. "When you are 11 with the rest of the children, and you will walk under a roof they raised and sit in a hall they warmed, and no one there will know that the thing at the heart of the whole school, the thing that keeps the children safe on the darkest nights, has a brother a mile under London, and a warden who eats his supper in Surrey and is learning gobbledegook on Thursdays. You will keep the secret, because that is the first duty of a warden and the last. And it will be the strangest thing in the world to walk through the founder's house as an ordinary boy, carrying the founder's greatest trust and telling no one." "I think I'll like it," Harry said. "The strangeness. I've been strange my whole life. It's nice to finally be strange about something good." He looked up at the old goblin who had bowed to him first, who had fed him first, who had wanted him for himself and not for what he carried. "Will you still come on Thursdays?" "When I'm at the school and after you're old, you keep saying it. I've done the arithmetic and I don't like the answer." Vornak was quiet for a moment, looking at the stars. "I have guarded a door for 91 years, he said at last, expecting to die guarding it, having never seen it open. And then a child rang like a bell, and I came running toward the sound, and the door opened, and I stood in the light of the thing I had guarded blind for the whole of my life. Everything past that is a gift, warden, and a goblin does not waste a gift by counting how many days of it are left. I will come on Thursdays for as long as there are Thursdays for me. And when there are not, Ripknot will come, and when he is old, the one he trains will come, because you have done a thing today that will outlast all of us. You have made the guarding of you a thing the goblins will fight to be chosen for. There will always be someone at your door. You will never again be a child no one comes for. We will see to it. That is a promise, and you know by now what a promise is." "It's not answered," Harry said softly. "It's kept, Vornak agreed. And he inclined his head, the bare degree that was the whole of a goblin's tenderness. and folded himself away between one streetlight and the next, and Harry Potter, 7 years old, warden of the vigil, keeper of a fallen star, stood alone at the gate of the greyest house on the greyest street in England with a 1,000-year-old coin warm against his heart, and looked up at the ordinary sky and found the brightest star in it and did not know its name, and decided he would learn it. Because he had a great many things to learn now, and the whole of his life to do it in, and for the first time that life stretched out ahead of him, not as a thing to be survived, but as a thing to be kept. Then he opened the gate and went in, and somewhere a mile beneath him in the blue dark, a fallen star turned slow above its plinth and hummed its 5-note chord into the patient rock, keeping its watch, kept in its turn, waiting as it had always waited, and as it would wait now with a welcome 1,000 years in the earning, for the warm and living hand that would come back to it on a Thursday and every Thursday for the whole of a life just beginning. Chapter 7 End.